Call to order, councillors.
And councillor.
So normally I would say please take your seats. I imagine that you're already seated. So good morning, everyone. And to our councillors that have joined us in chambers this morning, we've got Councillor Patterson, Councillor Baxter and Councillor Saul. We'll also have the Director, the General Manager, Craig Milburn, Director Robert Hitch and Director Steve Mitchell, and our Governance Manager, Daniel Thorogood. And to all the members of the public that have joined us by live stream this morning, welcome to the April 2020 Council meeting. Well, due to the protocols that are now in place for COVID-19, today's meeting is a different way of conducting business for a council meeting. So we'll need to be a bit patient, I think, and as always, respectful in our debate and in our conversation with each other. There's no public gallery and social distancing and hygiene standards are being practiced at this meeting. For anyone that's joining us by live stream for the first time, please understand that this is live stream for the public to observe council in the decision-making process. Everyone, including councillors joining by Zoom, please, if you could turn off your mobile devices and mobile phones to silent. So thank you. And it's a requirement that I state to all present that Kempsey Shire Council's Code of Meeting Practice includes live streaming, and your attendance at this meeting is taken as consent to the possibility that your image and or voice may be recorded and broadcast to the public via live stream. And also be aware, according to Council's Code of Meeting Practice, in regard to any audio or visual recordings of meetings, prior permission must be sought, and the decision to allow must be a unanimous decision of council. The meeting will observe morning tea break at approximately 10:30. So welcome again, everybody, and to the viewing public to the March 29, it's the April, I missed a month, April 2020 ordinary meeting of Kempsey Shire Council. And we will begin with item number 1, which is the opening prayer. Dear Lord, help us in our deliberation today so that our decisions will be for the greater good for the whole of the Kempsey Shire.
Amen.
Amen. And Council acknowledges that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Dunghutti people. I'm just going to suspend standing orders now so that we can observe a way of observing Anzac Day. I've asked that a returned serviceman, our Councillor Bruce Morris, leads us in the ode and then a minute silence. So, Bruce, if you would like to take it from here.
Initially, I'd just like to ask everybody to stand in recognition of those that have served our country and those that have made the ultimate sacrifice in so doing. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. We will remember them.
We will remember them.
We now move in to a minute's silence. So I would ask that everybody bow their heads and in that minute silence, and then at the end of that I'll announce that we can proceed with the meeting. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. In recognition of this solemn occasion, I would ask that everybody practice as the Mayoral column suggested on Anzac Day and gather either on their porch or at the end of their driveways. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. And just so the other councillors are aware, Council has organised for wreaths to be laid at the all the cenotaphs in the valley from the community to recognise the importance of the day and to commemorate and to say thank you to the people that have fought and served and died for us.
Madam Mayor, I'd just like to say that I wasn't able to stand for the reason I have an issue with my ankle.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you also. The suggestion for today came from Councillor Horville. We will move now into resume standing orders and move into apologies and application for leave of absence. I don't believe there's any. We're all present today. And item number 4 is the confirmation of minutes. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Patterson.
Second that.
Thank you, Councillor Saul. I can't see anyone's hand. Any dissent? No dissent, that's been carried. Any disclosure of interest? There's no disclosure of interest. Item number 6 is items suggested for pass by exception. There is item number 9.5, grant funding announcement, 9.6, hardship relief and ratepayers procedure, 9.7, local preference purchasing procedure, 9.8, development activity and LEP variations, 9.9, statement of cash and investment, 11.1, legal matters, and 11.2, the road bridge replacement tender.
Second that again.
So I have a mover and I have a seconder. We will take questions and then any withdrawals. So it's been moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Saul. If there's any questions or removals, if you just like Councillor Horville, and then I'll take Councillor Baxter. Councillor Horville.
Madam Mayor, thank you. In reports to Council on 9.9, statement of cash and investments. I'm challenged here by the iPad, but yes, I've got it. I have some questions on the statement of cash and investments, and I'm sure Mr. Mr. Mitchell will be able to answer it, or General Manager. In the statement of cash investments, page 3. And it's the graph showing the accrued investment income versus the budget. I guess my fellow councillors have also seen this. In February, we had $531,839 in investment income. And then in March, it dropped back to $525,232. So my question is, where did the $7,000 disappear to?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Horville, I believe that would be partly a factor of the impact that the coronavirus has had on investment markets, and I guess particularly in relation to some of the managed funds that we've got through TCOR. I don't actually have the exact breakdown of that difference between those items, and to be able to explain the full $6,000 or $7,000, but we do know that equity markets have been significantly impacted, and if you were to look at one of the other attachments, which shows the returns on that managed investment, which is a longer term investment over a 5 or 7 year time horizon, but that will have had a reduction in the return, and as a result, that would be playing through in terms of the impacting on that result.
So just to be clear, if I could, Mr. Mitchell, the banks are able to give you interest and then take it back?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, that's not correct. The way the investment income is calculated on the on those managed funds, you'll go up and down because it's linked to the equity portfolio, and I think we've had this question in the past, in that we've sometimes had initially when we took out that managed fund investment, we had a negative return, That then responded as the equity markets improved into quite positive territory. Obviously, with the way that the share market's been impacted over the last 6 weeks or so, that's actually now declined, and as a result, that's playing through in terms of the way that income number is recognised in our financial statements. What we will do, Councillor Horville, is obviously there'll be an update on all of these items as part of the next quarterly budget review, and there'll be commentary around that, because obviously we'd be expecting some impacts of that on the full financial year income item in relation to those investment returns.
Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor.
Councillor Baxter.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on 9.5, page 37 of the document, grant funding announcements. It's heartening to see we received $440,000 in government grants. I want to congratulate our team that applies for these grants. Thank you. We definitely need the money. It's a great achievement. I noticed that our request for funding of a youth leadership and youth festival grant was unsuccessful. Will we be applying for this grant again? Is the question.
Wherever it's appropriate, we will, yes.
That specific grant.
Either that or programs of that nature.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, may I
Just a moment.
speak on this with Councillor Baxter, if possible?
Sure.
Yes, I was just going to take Councillor Morris first, though, if that's okay. Councillor Morris?
Madam Mayor, I'd just like to suggest that we probably, or an amendment that we add 11.3. After the discussion last night, I can't see anybody voting or necessarily having any comment except to say let's proceed as quickly as possible. So I'd like to move an amendment that 11.3 gets added to the matters to be adopted.
And 11.3 is the motion on...
Trick and toilet.
Yes.
Sorry, that broke up.
Sorry, Councillor. Councillor Morris is proposing that we add 11.3, which is the review of the options of the Clyde Street car park, including award of tender for the amenities. He believes that there wouldn't be any dissent on that. I don't know if the mover wants to include that.
Madam Mayor, second, just happy to incorporate that.
Mover? Yeah. Are you happy to incorporate that? Yeah. I've still got Mark's questions, but I have Councillor Horville wanted to comment back to Councillor Baxter's question. Yes?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm actually going to withdraw 9.5 because I'd like to amend it and follow through on what Councillor Baxter was saying and specify that we apply for these grants again as a point 3 in that grant funding announcement. So we follow through and keep asking for those grants into the future until we are successful. So I was withdrawing 9.5, Madam Mayor.
9.5 has been withdrawn. Your further questions, Councillor Baxter?
Thank you, Chair. On 9.8, development activity, 9.8 is page 44 of the document. It's wonderful news. We've had a 40% increase in the number of new dwellings in the valley compared to last year. Outstanding news for our valley. The increased population only goes to fuel increased economic activity, and this is wonderful. My question is there a breakdown on these 130 or 140 new DAs we had this year that tell us whether some of these new DAs were of commercial and compared to residential?
Through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Baxter obviously refers to the number of new dwellings approved in that column that you would be referring to.
Yes.
So that would only relate to DAs that include a dwelling. So some commercial-related DAs wouldn't actually be included in that column.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, councillors. So at this point, we have in the consent to items to be passed by exception 9.6, 9.7, 9.8, 9.9, 11.1, 11.2 and 11.3. Councillor Horval.
Madam Mayor, thank you. I'd like to withdraw 9.7, 11.1 and 11.2 because I have questions and they are confidential and they have to be asked in confidential. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Is that the same for 9.7?
9.7, no, I have an amendment, Madam Mayor.
So at this point we have 9.5. No, we don't. No, we don't. We have 9.6, 9.8, 9.9 and 11.3. I have no more questions. Is there yes,
again, Madam Mayor, I'm sorry. If 11.3 is in, I cannot ask questions, and I was going to ask questions about the car park. So again, I'd have to withdraw 11.3 just so that I could.
11.3 has been withdrawn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
So it's 9.6, 8 and 9. Is there any dissent? Councillor Morris, you're voting against?
No, there can't be any dissent.
No, they can't.
It would be withdrawn if there was dissent.
So that is our item passed by exception. Thank you. We move on now to item 7.1, which is the Mayoral Minute that has been placed before you. And the recommendation supports the Local Government New South Wales campaign in response to the health and the economic crisis that we are facing due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Just briefly, it's a 6-part and quite a long recommendation. It's basically taken as is from the Local Government New South Wales campaign. It's to highlight to the federal and the New South Wales government financial and stimulus packages to local government so that our sector can continue to operate as we have been doing and to provide the services that we support the community with and are responsible for. The part 2, which calls for the increase of 1% to the FAG grant, which was 1%, and I think we were going to add those words, 1% of GDP, if I could have that added, because 1% of what doesn't really make that much sense to anyone that was reading this, which local government have been lobbying for some time, and it's consistent with all the recommendations that will be going back to the state and federal government. So for consistency, that's why we've gone with the 1%. And financial support for councils, for the employees especially. We all know that local government hasn't been included in JobKeeper arrangements that have been put in place for other areas. In the recommendation, it also highlights that we commend the New South Wales and federal government for the stewardship so far. We all recognise that we have done, especially in managing the pandemic at council. I think it's important to recognise also our staff and the way that this has been handled here, and also our community who've done the things that have been asked of them by the New South Wales and federal government and of the local council, and we have managed it better than we could have ever hoped when we were sitting here a month ago. We also want to endorse the campaign so that we're on board with our counterparts, that I know that this same recommendation has either gone to or will be going to our surrounding councils and I think every council in New South Wales. We do understand that many of our community and ratepayers will be facing financial hardships, and we'll need to help have some capacity to provide hardship relief and assistance to our community. And this recommendation also complements the next recommendation from our staff. So if there's no questions, I'll at Councillor McGinn, then I'll take Councillor Morris and then Councillor Hawthorne.
I just have a question of clarification, if I can, Madam Mayor, and that is by increasing the financial assistance grants payments from 0.5% to 1%, for Kempsey Shire Council, what would be the relevant cash increase in revenue, please?
Yeah, we'll have to come back to you, Councillor McGinn. We didn't get that overnight.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that as an update.
Councillor Morris.
Madam Mayor, after the discussion last night, I've just been thinking about the GDP and believe that we need to probably put down the word 1% of Australia's GDP.
Absolutely, accept that.
Because it could be the state or the council.
Yes, accept that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hawthorne.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to speak in favour of the motion and just talk quickly about the fact that we have a long road ahead of us as a council. The experience of what happened in the global financial crisis in 2008, we had unemployment skyrocket. Under the COVID-19 situation we're now facing, the unemployment rate is going to really spring up. It's talking about somewhere between 10 and 15% of Australians unemployed. We have a issue that goes back what the economists have written about, and that is that the recovery from a major crisis takes longer than they're falling into it. We've gone into this crisis in months, and it could be years before we come out of it. So every action we can take, which is outlined in the Mayoral Minute, is on the path to making sure that council can continue to operate in a financial strong way if possible. And the issue of recovery from the GFC back in 2008, it took nearly 8 years to get back to the unemployment figures that we had just prior to this pandemic. So we need to take the actions as outlined by the Mayoral Minute, and I commend it to my fellow councillors.
Thank you, councillors. Is there any dissent in vote? It's been passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move on to item number 9.1, which is the report, the COVID-19 pandemic report. Again, that is a recommendation that has quite a number of recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Saul.
Just, Madam Mayor, if I can, we just updated a couple of words in that overnight following a discussion at the briefing last night. Mr. Mitchell, do you just want to highlight the exact wording?
Just before, while Mr. Mitchell's getting that ready, the seconder was Councillor McGinn. Thank you, Director Mitchell.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. So some of the changes that we are recommending to that recommendation, under recommendation number 4A, we would remove the words after impacted business. So that recommendation would then just read, amends the hardship relief to ratepayers procedure 5.4.4 to apply to COVID-19 impacted businesses. In relation to recommendation 4E, we would include some additional words to say a minimum period to 31 October. So that would now read, waive all interest charges on outstanding rates for a minimum period to 31 October 2020. In relation to 4H, that recommendation would now read that a report be provided to a future council meeting no later than September 2020 that details the financial assistance provided as a result of the initiatives included within this resolution, and includes a recommendation for any further financial assistance should this be deemed necessary.
Councillor Saul, are you good with that?
Yes, Madam Mayor. May I speak to it?
Yes, you may.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, there was one I just missed, actually.
I'm sorry, I jumped in there.
No, that was my mistake. So in relation to 4F subsection 2, we just added some additional words just to clarify located within or on. So that recommendation would now read, provide rental relief for council business tenants and not-for-profit community groups located within or on council-owned properties. Previously, it just said located within. It didn't mean where you actually had a lease over a particular piece of land.
I'll take Councillor Saul too, who's going to speak, but then I'll Councillor Baxter, who's got a question. Maybe it'll be answered in Councillor Saul's address. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I just wanted to speak for the motion as I moved it, but also to highlight the amount of work that the Council, Director Mitchell and his staff have put into this motion. This is a lengthy motion, but I do believe it's a way forward for the community. So I just want to give a vote of thanks to Director Mitchell, GM and his staff for the work they've done. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Saul. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I too would like to applaud the this council's efforts. I think council's efforts via this 9.1 has kept our rate of infection down to 4 people in the valley since the beginning of this epidemic. I think it's a great achievement. Thanks to the council's efforts, we haven't had an increase in infection over the last 4 to 5 weeks. It's astounding. Also, referring to 9.1 at 4D, I'd like to applaud the wonderful initiative increasing the local preference purchasing procedure from 5% to 10% and increasing the cut-off from 25,000 to 50,000. This will give local businesses a much-needed advantage in winning contracts and helping the businesses of our valley come out of this crisis. It's an outstanding positive action for the valley. I'd like to applaud that initiative. And lastly, can I just ask the question at 4F, what you were just talking about, Director, 4F1, the Code of Conduct for Commercial Property. Does that apply to the private sector? Do they have to do that same Code of Conduct? Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I put the recommendation. Oh, Councillor Hallborn. Yes, I did have Councillor Hallborn. Thank you, Councillor Hallborn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to ask a question to Mr. Mitchell about this. On 4D, as Councillor Baxter just talked about, the local preference purchasing procedure, is there any particular reason why the 30th of June 2021 has been chosen, and could it be changed?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. That date, Councillor Horville, was chosen just to give an extended period for 14 months. There was, I guess it was just basically to extend that to cover the next financial year. In terms of extending that beyond that date, that's obviously a decision for councillors, and it'd just be a weighing up, I guess, in terms of the cost versus the benefit and the stimulus that would provide. From a staff perspective, it's easy for us to implement, whether it's 30 June 2021 or a later date.
So the recommendation that comes back to September on this issue, and if you and your staff see a need to extend that, you could do it in that matter being brought back in September this year.
That's correct.
Thank you.
It's probably still too early to consider it. It needs to be closer to the 30th of June 2021.
My other question was on 4D again, the local preference and purchasing procedure. We also have a recommendation today at 9.7 on this very matter, and it doesn't mention the change in the numbers, and I'm just wondering if we pass this motion, are we kind of predetermining what will have to be put in the 9.7?
No, through you, Madam Mayor. This makes it clear we can actually do this as part of it. The other one picks up the items out of the bushfire that were discussed back in November last year. So when we update the actual wording in the procedure itself, both of those will come together into the one updated document.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, councillors. There's no more questions. I put the recommendation all in. And is there any dissent? There's no dissent. It's passed unanimously. Thank you. Whoops, 9.2. Thank you, councillor. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Oh, councillor Baxter. Sorry. Councillor Patterson, seconded by councillor Baxter. This is the operating plan 2020.
Yep.
So, yeah.
You go. Yep. There's one change in the recommendation for.
There is one change in the recommendation, which I will ask the general manager to outline.
Through Madam Mayor, again, from following the briefing last night, we've just got one minor change. Mr. Mitchell will just outline that.
Yep, through you, Madam Mayor, the recommended change would just be to item 2 in the recommendation. So that would now read, a report be tabled at a future council meeting no later than July 2020. That reflects the conversation from last night and also the extension that the OLG has granted of an additional month to have those IPNR documents adopted. We are still able to adopt them at the June council meeting if we deem that appropriate. This just gives us an extra month if we need to take that extra time.
Absolutely. You're happy with that, councillor Patterson? I'll take councillor Baxter, then councillor Shields.
Thank you, Chair. My questions refer to the draft operational plan. So that's 9.2.1 of the attachments. The draft operational plan, 9.2.1. On page 15, at item HSO 1.1.12, page 15. Page 15 at 9 at HSO 1.1.12. Am I right to interpret where it says the contract has been awarded and construction commenced for the Crescent Head water treatment plant? Am I right to interpret that as saying that construction will happen this year, Director?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. So, Councillor Baxter, as you can see, the action is listed as construct the new Crescent Head water treatment plant, and the performance measure will basically be obviously the end of 2021 financial year measure where we'll measure ourselves against is contract awarded and construction commenced. We're certainly would be of the view that construction would be well and truly well progressed, if not completed by the end of that financial year. That's subject to contractor availability and also the necessary approvals that we need to, or statutory approvals that we need to receive for the treatment plant.
Thank you, Director. Can I, second question, Chair. On page 19 of the draft operational plan, at HSO 3.3.1, am I right to interpret where it says the Killick Creek management plan? Am I right to interpret that would entail or mean that with the breaking of the drought and the arrival of heavy rains recently, that the floodgates to the creek were opened at low tide so that the severe silting up of the creek could be addressed?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the action refers to preparing estuary management plans for a series of our estuaries and waterways, which includes Killick Creek. The performance measure that relates to that item is the completed tidal inundation and coastal vulnerability mapping to be completed by June 2021. So it's not what you were referring to there, Councillor Baxter. The floodgates out at Killick Creek are passively controlled, so we don't actively operate those. They operate on hydraulic head. There are drop boards that are inserted on occasions when there's poor water quality, particularly around holiday times, but they are passively controlled. So the tidal inundation work, or the modelling work that will be undertaken, will look at the tidal inundation of sea level rise predictions, and we'll look at recognising what environmental, social and environmental values are impacted via the results of that mapping, which will then inform the subsequent steps of the development of the estuary management plans under the framework that's in place for coastal management.
But Director, I take your point about passive, but could the council during heavy rain open those gates and just flush the creek out at low tide, move the couple of 100 tonne of sand?
Through Madam Mayor, so they're passively operated. They operate under hydraulic head, so we don't manually operate those gates. They're within the existing Killick Creek estuary plan, which obviously this current process will update. There are identified actions around excavation of the opening of the creek, and certainly within the new plan, those existing actions within the Killick Creek estuary plan will be reviewed. And I would note that the actions that are within that existing Killick Creek plan have been enacted certainly through the early 2000s. When siltation was occurring on a regular basis, but it hasn't required manual intervention for over 10 years now.
Thank you, Director. One more question. Another question, Chair. On page 27 of the same document, the draft operational plan, it's WSO 1.2.2, and on page 28, WSO 2.1.2, it refers there to expenditure by the council for public events, for NAIDOC week celebrations, etc. Given public cultural events will be seriously curtailed for the next 6 months or more, could these funds be diverted to projects that have been put further ahead on the council's agenda? I refer to the council's youth strategy, page 7 and page 21 of the Macleay Valley Community Infrastructure Strategy. On page 7, we are told that youth of the valley account for 20% of the valley's crime, and 25% of the houses in the valley do not have access to internet. On page 21, we are told that the council is the youth strategy provider. But on page 22, we are told that this may be 2 to 5 years away in addressing. Could not we divert public gathering expenditure towards addressing this urgent problem? I won't even mention the Promise Youth Centre at the old ambulance station that was actioned on the back of a high youth suicide.
Through you, Madam Mayor. There isn't a significant amount of funds, Councillor Baxter, that could be diverted from those actions that are listed in the operating plan, because most of those events are largely grant funded, so we can't just sort of divert them from the intended purpose to another purpose. The youth strategy is definitely something that's going to be worked on jointly between community development and our strategic planning area. There may be a way that we can actually sort of start that in the 2021 financial year, and that's something that will be considered, but we wouldn't be able to use the funds that would otherwise be allocated to those operating plan items to fund that.
And just to add to that as well, the two items you've actually highlighted, WSO 1.2.2 and 2.1.2, Cultural events certainly will involve young people anyway. The other ones are Youth Week, NAIDOC Week, Reconciliation Week, and International Women's Day. All of them will involve young people.
But they're public events. They might not happen because of all of this shutdown. And
we'd still be looking at how we celebrate those and engage people. We just may be doing it differently.
Oh.
And I guess just to add to that, it is for the next financial year as well. So that's through to June 2021. So.
Oh, okay. Can I, another question, Chair? Page 29 of the same document, the draft operational plan. At WHO, at page 29, WHO 3.2.3, destination marketing. Again, given the expected recession and the downturn in tourism, especially from overseas, could we divert our destination marketing expenditure to a marketing for people to reside in our valley? The 40% increase in people residing in our valley on last year's figures is a good sign. Would our valley not benefit from an advertising campaign that would increase our population whilst the tourism sector is in recession?
Yep. Through you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Baxter, as you would have seen in paper 9.1 on the COVID-19 pandemic, we're doing a lot of work in terms of how we respond to the current situation from an economic development perspective. So our economic development and tourism team are actively working to support local businesses now and develop plans so that as the restrictions start to wind back, that we can really support those businesses in terms of bouncing back to where they were prior to the pandemic. There'll be a whole lot of thinking that'll go into how we respond to this, not just from council's perspective, but through larger agencies, Destination North Coast, Destination New South Wales, etc., that will help in terms of how we address those particular items. I think more generally around actions focused on the LGA, and as you would have seen in the operating plan, there's a whole number of actions around executing items that are in our economic development and tourism strategy that will have broad impacts for the whole LGA. So I think in where we're at the moment sort of largely has the right process in place going forward, and we'll need to respond to that as we work with our other stakeholders as the COVID-19 restrictions wind back.
Just to also add to that, many visitors, or often go around the other way, a lot of people who move to an area actually first come as visitors, first come as tourists, so actually continuing to market the destination. And right now, even though visitors can't come, it's still important for us to keep the brand in the marketplace there as people start to think of next year, that they're thinking, come to the Macleay Valley, come to this part of the coast. So we don't want to be off people's radar altogether. So the destination really looks at who's going to come and visit, who's going to shift businesses here, who's going to come and live here. So it's really important we keep it going.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, GM. Just two more questions, Chair, sorry. On page 36 of the same document, CO 1.4, 11.4s and 115 regarding the implementation of the Crescent Head Master Plan. Will the work to implement this master plan start this year?
What was that page again, please?
Page 36.
It's an incorrect reference to Councillor Baxter.
Page 38.
Oh, sorry, page 38. CO 1.1.4 and 1.1.5.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Baxter, you would have seen probably in the list of projects there is some foreshore pathworks planned out of the in the foreshore area with some funding listed. As you'll see from the performance measure that's listed on both those actions, it refers to seeking funding opportunities. So any works are certainly contingent on that. So not at this point in time, but certainly we'll be pursuing avenues where they become available to enable aspects of those plans to progress.
Last question, Chair, page 39. page 39, it's CO 2.1.3, where it refers to the finalising of the adoption of the Reconciliation Action Plan. Have we workshopped with the Indigenous residents of the Valley, or are we workshopping with them before we adopt this action plan in June 21?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. Yep, Councillor Baxter, there'll be significant engagement with the Aboriginal community, both in terms of the development and then in the exhibition of the draft Reconciliation Action Plan. And that Reconciliation Action Plan will be done according to the national guidelines.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Shields.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to reiterate my concerns about this upcoming budget, and particularly given our long-term financial forecast and the deficit position that we're in. Looking at it, looking at our expenditure excluding depreciation for this budget, 106 million, and our expected revenue at 95 million, I'm assuming that expected revenue was assumed before COVID-19. So we don't know what the impacts are going to be on people being able to pay rates and how many apply for that financial hardship facility. Shouldn't we start by balancing this budget from the get-go? I know we've got a lot to peg back for our future, and obviously we're talking about a future rate rise, and I understand that we're not going to get out of our long-term financial position without a future rate rise. But there's immense financial pressure on people at the moment, and I just feel like we should be taking some things out of this operating plan so that we can start to actually show some financial leadership in this difficult time that we're facing at the moment. And I know so much work goes in, to IPNR and reporting, but I just feel that we set up an expectation because we often leave things too long before we can actually start to do things. And I sit here year on year as a councillor and go, oh, that's a great project. Oh, that one I probably don't see as a priority for spending our money. But as an individual, I understand my bias, and that just because I'm not keen on that project and I don't see valuable use of our money, to other portions of our community, that is a valuable spend. So I just feel like we need some more prioritising. I think we need to actually, my gut feeling is that we need to take some things out of it so that we can balance things and look more stably towards the future as such. But I understand that just doing things in this year is not going to change or make a big difference in our long-term financial forecast, but I just feel like we need to start. And obviously there are so many things that we've changed, our previous motion, our responses to COVID-19. Council's done so much in this short period. Surely there are things, efficiencies that we've discovered that hopefully we can continue on, once the pandemic actually finishes in terms of saving money. But I do think in terms of our capital projects, we could probably look at them and prioritise them a little more. Don't know what everyone else's thoughts are on that, but I just feel uncomfortable starting in this position for our budget next year.
Through you, Madam Mayor, you are correct, Councillor Shields. This was done pre-COVID-19, and certainly there will be impacts of that. The staff have worked through to try and, produce a budget that is workable in the short term. It's certainly going to need, and that's what we've highlighted, there needs to be a lot of work over the next couple of years to turn around the long-term deficits that the organisation and the community is actually facing. We are also quite happy to sit down with the councillors and over the next, probably the next 4 to 6 weeks, and if council wish to make this a balanced budget, we can certainly come up with ways of actually doing that. But councillors and the community have got to accept what pain that will actually involve. There's always ways to cut services and to cut delivery of projects. There's always ways of actually doing that. It's just a matter of what the priority is. If the decision of the council is to do that, you'd want to add a third resolution to this, is that we place this out on exhibition and it comes back, but that council hold a workshop with the key staff in the next 4 to 6 weeks to look at what services would be reduced or cut and what programs will be deleted from the program.
I just feel as an individual councillor, it's very difficult to actually name projects because it does look quite discriminatory at times when you're saying, oh, I don't think that's a a good spend of our money given, you know, our financial climate at the moment. Is it possible for us to come back, or for council to come back with some sort of prioritisation of, you know, say the new capital projects that are on there, even if councillors were to give council, the organisation, some sort of parameters or criteria to actually fit that against?
We're actually working on that at the moment. That's the exact thing that we've actually got staff working on. So we can fast track some of that and try and bring that back in the next 4 to 6 weeks to have that workshop with the councillors. Borrowing costs also are an option for council to look at. We don't have a lot of borrowings. If you're going to borrow, now's the time to borrow with the cost so low. And that actually also brings in the whole intergenerational equity options through taking out borrowings as well. We just got to be careful what we take those borrowings for. But if the councillors of the mind, then like I said, we can have a workshop in 4 to 6 weeks where we can bring that prioritised list and key principles that actually underpin that, to have a discussion with council to look at pulling the budget back to a balanced situation if that's what they still choose to do.
Just to
Can
finish,
I just
personally,
make,
I'd feel
can
that...
I just pull you up for a minute, Councillor Shields? I think this probably deserves some more conversation. I'm going to take it that we are in a workshop.
Move that we move to the workshop.
Thank you. And it's been seconded. I will agree that we have this as a discussion in a workshop parameters.
Thanks, Madam
There's
Mayor.
no dissent on that. I think that will give us more free flow, because I think this is a really important conversation. As we know, the operating plan and the budget and the long-term financial plan is the most important recommendation for the term of council. So we need to make sure that we're focused on what we're doing here and give it the time that it deserves. So, Councillor Shields, you want to continue?
Just a final point, and thank you, Madam Mayor, and I realise that wasn't really following our code of meeting practice, so thank you for moving us into committee of the whole. But basically, just to sum up, is that, as I said, I'm feeling very uncomfortable not having a balanced budget. I think good leadership is about being flexible and being adaptive. Obviously, a lot of work has gone in to these documents well before COVID-19 has hit us, but now we need to be reflexive, and I think we need to actually prioritise our spending in a far more robust way than we ever have before. And I think given our long-term financial deficit, we need to actually start this budget, and we need to start making some hard decisions.
Councillor McGinn, then I'll take Councillor Baxter, and then I'll take Councillor Saul.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'm really appreciative to Councillor Shields for bringing us into this discussion. I too have some concerns about not moving forward to a balanced budget. I don't know that we necessarily have to have a balanced budget this first year, but certainly we need to be showing that we're heading in that direction more speedily than this operating plan delivers. I also take on board that it was prepared before COVID-19. But given that we are now in a new world and we do have a lot of ratepayers that are struggling with unemployment, and we just don't know how that's going to play out for our community, I can't see the special rate variation in the very near future is going to help us in increasing our revenue to be able to deliver the myriad of fabulous projects that have been worked on, also taking into consideration that a lot of that is grant funded as well. I realise that. But I do, where I was going to go with this, and I'm glad that the General Manager has suggested it as a part 3, and I would recommend it to my fellow councillors. I do believe we do need a workshop so that we can actually work through this. I still think that we should put the plans out on exhibition. That is all we're doing, putting them on exhibition for the community's input. And I would be very interested to hear, hopefully we can get enough of the community on board for them to be able to comment and highlight perhaps some priorities for them that are in the plan, and perhaps some things that aren't of as great a priority to be able to guide us in our decision making. Coming back to what Councillor Shields has said, and I do believe it is being responsible, we need to show leadership and make some tough decisions, and I don't think we should apologise for that. So I look forward to the opportunity of a workshop before we actually adopt the operating plan, and I think there's going to more than likely be some changes to that operating plan as a result of a workshop that all the councillors are can contribute to. So I thank you.
Councillor Baxter, and then Councillor Saul.
Thank you, Chair.
And then Councillor Morris.
Well, I completely disagree with Councillor Shields. I don't know whether she's noticing what's happening at the federal and the state level, but as an arm of government, not as a private corporation, which we are not, as an arm of government, we should be, like every other section of government, helping keep the ship afloat. Keep spending happening, go into debt if we have to. This phobia about debt, the federal and the state government have shown a clear courage. I think the state government's forked $5 billion into the economy. The federal government's gone $200 billion into debt because of the crisis. For us to turn around and say, well, no, let's just balance the books so that everything's neat. I see on page 16 of the long-term financial plan, our debt servicing ratio is classified as healthy, which I would interpret, from my limited understanding, as we have a capacity to go further into debt if our debt servicing ratio is well above any serious benchmark. So in a situation where, as Councillor Horville mentioned, we're looking at 10, maybe 17% unemployment. For us to pull spending back, I think would be irresponsible. From a classic Keynesian point of view, in a recession, and they're talking about depression. They're talking about depression. For us to pull spending back so that we've got a neat set of books, I think is irresponsible. And as far as intergenerational debt, well, yes, the future generations can pay for the debt because we are in a economic crisis.
Councillor Baxter, I'm not saying we cut all funding. I'm saying we reduce our operating plan to actually match our expected revenue for a change, which we haven't done for many, many years, and look at the position that we're in. And unfortunately, if we don't start to do something, you're going to be looking at ratepayers looking at the maximum special rate variation, which is not what I want to see.
The next person was Councillor Saul, then I'll take Councillor Morris, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, as a true Conservative, I disagree with Councillor Baxter wholeheartedly. We need to be mindful of spending and not just go out on junkets, tax and spend. The point is our ratepayers don't want to be burdened with extra debt. The feeling is in the community that while council's operating, they don't want us to go madly into the wild, raising debt and causing further hardship in future times. Madam Mayor, a workshop would be ideal. An exercise must be done to allow us to consider what we can afford, what we may have to delay. So even if we do not make major changes, the exercise itself is important to undertake to make sure we have hands-on and a full grasp of what we can do. And with the feedback from the community over the operational plan, when it comes back from exhibition, it will give us some guidance what the community is feeling. So I believe a workshop must happen to allow us as councillors to show leadership and to plan for the future. Thank you, Madam.
Councillors, just before we go on to thank you, Councillor Saul, before we go on to the next person that has indicated to speak, which is Councillor Morris, you'll notice that on your screen, item number 3, a suggested item number 3, that staff conduct a workshop prior to the end of May with councillors to look at options to move the draft budget to a balanced or near balanced position, because that scenario hasn't been put before us. What we have got in our operating plan is a scenario where we haven't even looked at an alternative. So this item number 3 will give us in a workshop that option put in front of us. So I'll take Councillor Morris and then I'll take Councillor Patterson.
Madam Mayor, as I suggested at our last workshop, I believe we need to be cutting. What's that?
I was just recognising Councillor Horval so he could put his hand down.
Okay.
And then Williams.
As I mentioned the workshop a couple of weeks ago, I believe we need to be trimming all capital works that we possibly can, and I appreciate a lot of it is grant funded. We need to make sure that any capital works that we do proceed with add to the potential for council to realise a better position into the future. I disagree slightly with what point 3 is saying, because that emphasises too much in my mind about moving to a balanced, and it says or near balanced. I think we need to be softening a little bit to say to move the draft budget towards a balanced budget, because we need to look at more capacity. That we may not be able to move it too far, but we need to move it to what is reasonable. The way we are looking at is if we do go out and borrow, we are just committing our community to a considerable cost in the future. I'm not saying don't do capital works. I'm saying we need to be more judicious about which capital works we do, and we need to make sure they are going to provide benefit to the community and benefit to council in the longer term. I equally cannot see how the community can afford 12.5% for 3 years. I remember quite clearly when we voted on the last special rate variation, we were told by the then General Manager that the reason why we need such a large increase was because it will solve our financial problems into the future. It hasn't solved our financial problems into the future. We need to cut our cloth to fit with what we can afford and what our community can afford. And I think if we proceed to do too much capital works, we will be in a position where our community just cannot afford it. They can't at the moment, and it'll be several years before they can.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Can I just capture those words to the side there, towards a balanced budget, and see how we feel about that? That wording in item number 3.
To move towards a balanced budget.
Yeah. To move
towards a balanced budget. Not to a balanced budget, but to move towards a balanced budget.
Yeah. Which in so you're putting forward the fact that in a workshop situation, given a bit more time and a bit more analysis, we would have a better understanding. You know, we do have a 10-year plan. You're not saying in this wording it's not directed.
Not saying it must be balanced. We need to consider
budget, yeah, but we're on that direction to go towards it.
The other concern that I've got. Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
Please. The other concern that I've got is we're going to do this at the end of May. We really need to be putting this out to the community in some way. The community might say, no, we don't want these cuts. We're happy to pay into the future. So I believe that we need to somehow get this done in a timely enough manner to at least put it out to public exhibition, even if it only be for 7 or 14 days prior to adopting the operating plan.
Can I just ask a question, General Manager? I think you want to speak. If we put this one out, do the workshop, do more work, and then come back and put the revised one out on public exhibition? Is there anything to say we can't do that, or do you have to only put it out once?
Through you, Madam Mayor, you just got to fit the time frames. That's going to be the issue to try and do in that way. There's nothing to stop you putting it back out. I'll just take a step back first. What council sees is the draft budget. It's got the DPOP in there. It's got the 10-year long-term financial plan laid out there over the next 10 years. I'll also remind council that you've actually got an adopted financial sustainability strategy, which underpins all of these things, which in that strategy, the actions look at firstly at what we can do internally to try and save things, and then obviously what may need to happen externally in terms of increases to fees and charges, rates, those sorts of things. So that's what the staff are actually working through at the moment. In terms of timing with all of this, to try and put something back out on exhibition, and even if you looked at the July council meeting, it will be very difficult to do 2 lots of exhibition. It's certainly not impossible. What you may look at doing is actually holding an extraordinary council meeting, right at the 30th of July or something like that. Instead, to actually give yourself another 10 days or so to actually do it. The other part will be to move this even towards a balanced budget that will involve some pretty significant decisions on, one, capital works, but more realistically, services that are provided, and engaging with the community about how they feel services may or may not be important to them. You simply don't have enough time to actually do that in any adequate way. Even if we could have full normal situation, you certainly don't have the time to do that, because to bring this back by even $3 or $4 million isn't a matter of just cutting $3 or $4 million out of a capital project. It's a lot more significant than that. It would be numerous projects and potentially cuts to existing service levels. I think if we can run a workshop by the end of May, you start to look at what are some of those initial savings. What we would look at doing anyway, we would actually look at bringing a whole range of options to you from the operating budget, which would say if you cut these things, that is how you can bring it back to a balanced position. And then you would work backwards from there to say, well, we're not going to cut this, we're not going to cut that. But it needs to come out of the operating budget. That's where our issue is. The issue isn't in relation to capital, it's actually in relation to our operating budget. So we need to be able to pull that back. And that's where the pain will be for the councillors, the staff and the community in actually doing it. So I'd suggest that we run this workshop as soon as we can. We may get it into the middle of May, something like that. If our staff work on it over the next 4 weeks, we then look at potentially, if you do that, look at having an extraordinary council meeting towards the end of July. We may be able to get it back out for comment for another 7 or so days, but it really will be insufficient in terms of gauging the community's genuine view on what those cuts will actually look like.
Unless there's really strong views.
Yeah, and with strong views, we know we'll always get the handful of strong views. That's what we always get. That's local government. Doesn't matter what we put out, those views will always come out, but there'll always be a minority of the community who actually express those.
I'm going to take Councillor Patterson, then it was Horval, then it was Williams. Thank you, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just looking at our operational plan and budget moving forward, we obviously have a new aspect to deal with, and that's the COVID-19 that wasn't brought upon by any of us. So it's something that we have to move forward to deal with. I do think it's too early to make any concrete decisions on reductions of, but to look forward to the future and the options that we have in front of us. Projects moving forward are definitely benefits for the community financially and emotionally. There's a lot of the, in the operational plan, there's a lot of those that are annuals services. There's a lot of those that are carryovers, which is something that we could possibly utilise in the future by moving projects further forward. I think a meeting workshop is a responsible direction to take to deal with the future of the COVID-19. But and I also do think that debt is something that we're going to have to build into our budget moving forward. And while it's not necessarily a really good thing, I don't think councils should be operating on a black budget. That proves that they're not operating to their full capacity. But I do think everyone's intention in the room here is to move forward with a budget that's workable, that delivers for our community financially and emotionally, the needs for our community. So what General Manager was just talking about, having future meetings moving forward about this issue is, I think it's a responsible attitude, but I do not think just finally, I do not think it's a good idea to pull back and continue the slowdown. I think we need to work with what we've got and move forward.
Councillor Hovell, then Councillor Williams. Just before we take Councillor Hovell, the general, and this might influence some of the things you may think about, the General Manager would like to make a comment.
Being in workshop, I think it's just easy to keep this thing going the way it is. Firstly, let me first say I'm very, very happy that councillors are wanting to really get engaged with the budget. It's not often you get a group of councillors who are really wanting to do that. So from a staff point of view, that is very heartening to actually have you as a group of councillors really wanting to get into this, because it is always very difficult to turn long-term deficit positions around, and it's not easy to do. One of the other things you may like to think about is that we still go through this process, but you may want to put into a resolution when you adopt the actual budget, whatever it might look like, that you put in an additional resolution is that you adopt it with a resolution saying that further reductions are targeted in the first quarterly budget review of the next year as well. That will give you a bit more time in terms of the community engagement aspects of it. So you may be able to take some initial look and cuts out of the draft, how it is at the moment, with further cuts to come in the first or second QBR of the next financial year.
Councillor Hovell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Up until about 3 months ago, I would have been in total agreement with Councillor Shields and Councillor Saul. But at the moment, I'm in total agreement with Councillor Baxter and Councillor Patterson in the fact that we are facing, and it's been used so often, an unprecedented situation, not just in our shire, but in our country and in the world. And one of the sayings I keep reflecting on, if you don't learn from history, you're going to repeat it. And at the moment, as Councillor Baxter said, we're heading into a depression. 1929, there was a New York crash on the Wall Street stock markets. The flow-on from that happened over 3 years. In Australia, we had nearly 50% unemployed. People were out hunting rabbits as their only source of meat. There was no jobs, and the government finally stepped in and did things in Australia that got the economy going again. We've got just an example, the concrete road that was built near Grafton. There's still evidence of that, still there near Almurra, and it's still now tarred over. But up until about 10 years ago, you still had drove over the actual concreting done by a huge number of unemployed people that were helping the economy to start again. Now, we're at the beginning of the impact on our economy, not just the Shire, but the whole country. And we've addressed it with the Mayoral comment, a Mayoral Minute today, and we've voted in favour of that. We're looking to try and make expenditure to help our country and our Shire recover. And it's going to be a long-term thing. It's not 1 year, it's not going to be 6 months. It's possibly going to be 10 years before we get back to where we should be. So this is not the time, in my opinion, to try to get back into the black. We've got to find the money, get the loans, get the grants, spend in our community, and keep our local economy working as well as we can, not just for our local economy, but the whole country. So at the moment, I don't see the need for this workshop at this time, for the simple reason, in the long term, we don't know what the effect of this unprecedented event that's happening throughout the world.
Councillor Williams.
Here, here.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I tend to agree with Councillor Baxter, Saul and Hovell in a way. I understand, we need to show initiative and show that we are leading, like our federal and state governments, in boosting our economy. Just to let people know, I'm sure everybody's seen it on the TV, but we had an unemployment rate of 8.1% here in Kempsey in 2019, and myself working in employment services, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of people line up at our doors to come in and seek help because they've lost their jobs. So I actually, while it's all good that we say, yes, we go and borrow, and we've got to make a way of paying for it, obviously our way of paying for it is either cut services or raise rates, and find that balance. It's going to be a very, very difficult thing to find that balance, and somebody's got to take the pain at some stage. And as Councillor Hall said just then, that was, we're in it for a long run. We've all got to be in it for the long run. Not just council services. It's everybody. It's right across the board. Everybody's got to be on par with it. But I totally agree that we need to look at that. But we are also a workshop. I think it's very important that we understand what the picture is if we go one way, what the picture is if we go the other way, because we don't quite have that just yet. So I think it's really, really important that we have that workshop, regardless of which way we go.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. As we're still in a workshop mode of operating, I think every councillor so far has spoken. Councillor McGinn wants to speak again, and so does Councillor Saul. Is that right? I haven't spoken as yet, and I think I do need to indicate where I sit on this. And where I sit is I don't think I have enough information or confidence in. I do have in putting out the draft plan because that was what was put forward, but I think there still needs to be some work done on where we come up with the final plan, given the fact that we have been given another month by the Office of Local Government. My view is we do need to use that and look towards something that may sit a bit between working towards a more sustainable future financially. I don't know the full impact of COVID-19. I don't think any of us have got a handle on that yet, how much more that's going to add to our pain of trying to get into a sustainable way over the next 10 years. I think item number 3 addresses the concerns that most of us have. There's still a long way to go in this conversation, and for me, we haven't hit that place yet where I can confidently say, yes, I'm really, really good with that budget or that operating plan for 2020. So I'm going to ask Councillor Baxter wanted to speak again. No, Councillor McGinn wanted to speak again. Thank you, Councillor McGinn. And then when you're ready to move back into council, if someone could move that way.
I just have a question. Given the discussion that all the councillors have, would it be the General Manager's intention that when the suite of documents go out on public exhibition that there be sort of like a special forward or update that goes with these documents to explain to the community that these were prepared pre-COVID-19 and that there will, that in light of if we are now going to have a workshop, that there could be some commentary in just that front page forward that says that councillors seek feedback from the community so that the community have the suite of documents realise that this is not, that it's still fluid, I guess.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, certainly we can put something like that. I think what we've got to draw the community's attention to is that pre-COVID-19 we had a significant deficit position. Post-COVID-19 it is only going to be worse. I think that's the story. We're not doing the reason to have this workshop and really look at the budget really has very little to do with COVID-19. It is actually to do with an underlying deficit position that the organisation and the community actually face. So we can certainly phrase some words around that and communicate that to the community that this is draft, but we are going to be looking at how to pull that back from where it actually is While I've got the microphone, could I suggest a point 4 be added, and that would read that the July ordinary meeting of council be rescheduled from Tuesday the 21st of July 2020 to Tuesday the 28th of July 2020. That just saves having an extraordinary meeting. We can actually plan around that, and we would look at actually bringing that revised budget back in July.
Thank you. Councillor McGinn, you've got further comment?
No, happy with that. And I think the point 4 is a good idea.
Okay. I'll take Councillor Shields, then Councillor Morris.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I think it is prudent to use that extra month to finalise our IPNR. Obviously, we're dealing with some exceptional circumstances here, and I think it's important to take the time. So I definitely agree with point 4. The main thing that brought this up for me is that we need to prioritise our spending. So to me, we need to direct this money in the most effective way for our COVID-19 and our bushfire recovery. That's what it's about. The majority of our operating plan heads us in that direction. However, I do see some projects as projects that could be done in any year, and they don't really affect our recovery. So therefore, I don't think they're the most effective spend for that money. But really, while this whole thing comes about is I'm not trying to put the brakes on infrastructure or curtail, our community vision as such. What I'm trying to do is save our community from a massive special rate variation in the future. That's what this is about. And I agree with Councillor Morris. When we had our last special rate variation, it was coined that this would really help us in our long-term financial planning and sustainability. However, look at the position that we're in, look at our 10-year forecasts. That rate variation is like a blip now. We're not really seeing, any of the results of it. To me, our position just seems to be getting worse. So it shows that we need to do things differently. Otherwise, our community is up for a lot of pain in the future in terms of a massive rate rise. So we need to start the conversation. I'm not saying we make the decisions right now. I think that was a great suggestion from our General Manager about even talking about, maybe changing things in that first quarterly budget review. I'm not saying we make immediate decisions, but we need to start that conversation because we do not know what these changes potentially even look like. That's what this motion is about to me.
Thank you, Councillor. There is 2 other councillors that wish to speak, but I think we need to start thinking about whether we go back into open council. So I'm going to take Councillor Morris was next.
Madam Mayor, I'd just like to sort of say I agree completely with what Councillor Shields just said. We need to be making sure that we minimise expenditure as much as we can without impacting too much on the community and the services provided. At the same time, I'd like to request that we change a couple of words in point 3 is rather than to look at options, to consider options, and rather than to move the draft budget towards a balanced budget, to improve the budget outcome. And I don't think we need a balanced or near balanced, because a near balanced is towards. Just thoughts for improving the wording on that. Rather than looking at, we should be considering options. I don't know how others think.
Yeah, happy with that.
Board of that.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of wordsmith.
We're starting to get really close now. Councillor Saul.
Well, Madam Mayor, I think we've been around the table a few times. I think it's actually working towards a very good outcome. I think the workshop, once held, will give us options to present to the community and say where can we maximise and minimise our expenditure for the best bang for the buck. People want services. We must make sure that we're not going to outprice ourselves financially to the community. This workshop, I think, is a great start to make sure that the community is involved. As councillors, we can lead that discussion. So the community, we are actually reacting to your concerns, but most important, we are good stewards financially. That's the bottom line. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Move we go back into regular meeting.
Second that.
No.
Thank you. Any dissent? We're back into open council. We did have a mover, which was Councillor Patterson. Are you happy with all the changes that are there in front of us now?
Yes, Madam Mayor, very much so.
Councillor Saul, we don't need the seconder to accept that, do we?
No.
Oh, Councillor Morris.
Just another question, Madam Mayor, on a different matter. In relation to fees and charges, on page 13, we have a list of exceptions to aircraft movement charges. I would just like to ask, is it considered reasonable that if somebody pays, or somebody that is a high user of the airfield or of the airport, pays an aircraft parking fee, say of $515 for a sealed park or $410 for a grass park, should be exempt all landing charges for the entire year, or whether there should be a limit put on that. And if that limit was, say, 200 movements per annum, that would mean that that particular aircraft owner or company that operated that aircraft would get a benefit of a minimum benefit of $2,260 for their outlay of either $515 or $410. I think it's unreasonable that a large user that would generally be of a commercial basis in nature gets exempted all movement charges for a minimal parking fee allowance. And I'd like to move an amendment that the note on page 13 gets changed to aircraft subject to aircraft parking fees be exempt for 200 aircraft movements per annum, with full movement charges liable for additional movements. Do I have a seconder?
Madam Mayor, we might just get Mr Mitchell to explain how that actually works.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Morris, I guess the challenge we've got around getting the fees for the airport is whilst it sits within our commercial business, it's not commercial in terms of returning a profit and making money. And so I guess we're always trying to balance off the fees and charges in relation to the airport to maximise the benefit of that in what's a reasonable and fair way. And hence that's why the fees and charges were put that way. So it was sort of on a user pays basis. Those fees and charges are consistent with prior year, so I don't think there's been any real change to that. I would imagine that there's an opportunity when they go out on exhibition for any of those people who are impacted to actually make a submission, and for us to then assess that as part of the exhibition period and bring that back to council with the final documents.
At the same time, I acknowledge that we have previously done that.
Just a moment, Councillor.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Morris. And just to be clear, the training college, that doesn't apply to them in terms of that. That's for private aircraft operators.
It doesn't say that anywhere in fees and charges.
It says for the fees and charges, says annual usage fee for private aircraft operators.
They're classed as a private aircraft operator. They're a commercial business.
Where does it say in fees and charges? Doesn't mention anything about that for...
It's probably commercial in confidence, is it?
Makes no mention of private.
Companies like AAC actually get charged the full landing fee. So every time they do a touch and go, they get charged the full landing fee.
Even if they have registered car parks or plane parking places.
That is correct.
Or can the fees and charges be changed or amended to reflect that comment? Because there's no mention of those exemptions only being for private aircraft operators. The only mention is annual usage fee for private aircraft operators, including ultralights, microlights and helicopters. The rest of it, there's no mention of whether it be private or whether it be commercial.
You can clarify that.
Because there's no mention of it being restricted to private within the fees and charges document itself.
Yeah, we'll make that clarification.
Yep.
Okay.
So Councillor Morris is withdrawing his amendment?
I take it that that's what you're doing, are you, Councillor Morris?
I'll withdraw on the basis that the fees and charges are changed, but obviously I reserve the right to bring it back up at the time of adoption on the basis that it was discussed and withdrawn on the discussion or answer provided by staff at this meeting.
Yeah. providing it's there next time round. Councillor Baxter, you have questions.
So the vote would be for all of 9.2, the nom of all of 9.2 in a minute, will it?
What is on your screen? All 4 points. The council draft integrated planning and reporting documents be placed on public exhibition for 28 days.
Yeah.
A report be tabled at a future council meeting no later than July 2020, detailing the submissions received during the public exhibition and presenting a final document for adoption. That council staff conduct a workshop prior to the end of May with councillors to consider options to improve the budget outcome. And that could be in either expenditure or in income, or both, combination. That the July ordinary meeting of council be rescheduled from Tuesday the 21st of July 2020 to Tuesday 28th of July 2020. That's what we are about to vote on.
Just a very minor thing, but I did note in my calendar that Tuesday the 28th of July is an audit committee meeting for Kempsey Shire Council. Audit committee.
Yeah, we would see the audit committee.
Councillor Morris.
Just one suggestion for change, Madam Mayor, given the discussion and what's happened in point 4, that we change point 2 to say a report be tabled at the 28th of July 2020 council meeting, because it's now evident that it's going to come back to the 28th of July. So rather than say at a future council meeting no later than July, it's definitely going to be in July now. So let's make it the 28th of July so everybody is aware.
You done? Yep.
Can I question?
Councillor Patterson did.
Well, can I go? I just ask some questions about 9.2 in general, not specifically that bit there. So, can I just ask, looking at the 9.2.3 long-term financial plan, the attachment to 9.2, the long-term financial plan on page 4. I'd like to ask the director, the operating performance ratio says there that we are outside the normal benchmark with the operating performance ratio. I'd just like to ask the director that given we are going through extraordinary times, including the gargantuan debt the federal government is accepting as necessary to deal with the crisis, are we not able to accept a operating performance ratio outside the benchmark for a limited time until the crisis has passed?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Baxter, we've obviously been reporting that ratio in a deficit position on and off over the past years, and that's what's forecast to be like that. You wouldn't want to be consistently recording an operating performance ratio that's below the benchmark, because that's the key indicator around ongoing sustainability. Right. The Office of Local Government did issue some guidance over the last couple of weeks in recognition of the COVID-19 situation, and said that in the very near or short term, the councils may experience their ratios not meeting benchmark, which would be understandable. I guess the challenge for us as an organisation is that even pre-COVID-19, as the General Manager has alluded to, our ratios were forecast to be below benchmark anyway. Ultimately, as the discussion's been this morning, that's a decision for the councils in terms of how long they're prepared to accept that ratio being below benchmark.
Thank you, Director. Second question, Chair. Page 16, Director.
Madam Mayor, I hate to interject. Can we adjourn the meeting for morning tea? This looks like it's going to go on for a while.
Madam Mayor, put a vote.
I've just got 3 more questions.
I have that to a vote whether we move to morning tea or not. Who agrees with going to morning tea now or continuing till we get it to a resolution?
Just want to finish.
No, we'll continue. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to point, with the unrestricted, on page 16, Director, with the unrestricted current ratio being under review, does that refer to changing the benchmark to accept these extraordinary times? And secondly, likewise with the debt servicing ratio, are we not well placed with this debt servicing ratio to accept an increase in debt?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I guess my response is pretty similar to the last question.
Okay.
Councillor Baxter, it all goes to our underlying financial sustainability and how long councils are prepared to have ratios that are below benchmark.
Okay, thank you, Director. A question on page 36, Director Fish, on W3422, page 36, the ceiling of Plummer Road, Crescent Head. Will this begin this year, and is there reference to Mayoral River Road in that ceiling document there?
Councillor Baxter, just in relation to points on Plummer Road, yes, certainly the intention is for the ceiling of that to commence this year. We're currently finalising the review of environmental factors, and that'll have community comment on it prior to finalising that. And similarly, the design is very much near completion. So we'd certainly like to think we'll be in a position to tender the works around mid-year, and then obviously works commence later this year. Mayoral River Road is not indicated there at the moment. We've applied under the Fixing Local Roads grant late last year, and we're just awaiting the outcome of that application. Obviously, the project was announced in 2019 that it would be funded. So we're certainly obviously looking forward to the confirmation of that funding to enable us to commence the necessary planning works that will need to occur, and then ultimately the works.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Director. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other questions? Just before I put the recommendation, I'd just like to thank the councillors for the way that we have put this into committee of the whole, and we have shown council in absolute fantastic action. This was a really, really important conversation that we had to have, and I think to just vote through an operating plan without that conversation would have been totally irresponsible. Thank you, councillors. Any dissent on the recommendation? It's been carried unanimously. We will now break for morning tea, and I'm sorry that took us over by 10 minutes. We'll come back about 11 o'clock, 5 to 11. Thank you. We will now resume the meeting, and we are on item 9.3, which is the resolution about the community infrastructure strategy. Do I have a mover?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Do I have a
Second that.
Oh, I'll take Councillor Williams. His hand went straight up. Councillor Baxter, do I have any questions? Do I have any dissent? Councillor Horval has a question.
Question, Madam Mayor. Thank you. In the community infrastructure audit report, the community infrastructure consultation summary and the draft Macleay Valley community infrastructure strategy, I found there are 70 instances where the reference is to the Macleay Valley, and there are 4 instances to the Macleay Valley Shire. So I'm just wondering, Mr. General Manager, you said last year when we talked about this that there's been no decision to change the name until we go to
Mayor, I'd like to move
a poll. And I'm just wondering whether the poll is still going to go on, and will we have a report back in June as the decision, or do you intend to change that about having a poll on the change of the council name?
Just before you do, Councillor McGinn, were you moving an amendment?
Madam Mayor, I'm not quite sure what the correct protocol is, particularly, and apologies to Councillor Horval for interrupting, but I'm not quite sure what the correct protocol is here. But I would like to move an urgent motion that no further discussion or resolutions be made with regards to changing the name in documents from where the Kempsey Shire Council is actually referred to as the Macleay Valley. I'm getting quite sick of the distraction.
What that, Madam Mayor?
I'll just ask Daniel.
That it not further
further
discussion or motions come back on the
that's an urgent procedural motion.
Reference of the Kempsey Shire Council of the Macleay Valley or similar type comments within documents be tried to change to Kempsey Shire Council. It's just a time waster.
Take it back.
Madam Mayor.
Just a moment.
Point of order.
And the point of order is?
That I asked the question, I thought I'd hear the answer before we had any procedural motions spring in.
Well, this is
the
coming.
Basic bit of procedure there that we should follow, and I asked the General Manager a very simple, straightforward question, and I'm hoping for an answer.
I'll take the answer, and then we'll deal with the urgent procedural motion.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, the item before us is actually the community strategic plan. It has nothing to do with the name of council. The position at the moment, there's a resolution of council to bring a report back in June in relation to a way forward for a change of name. That original decision was based on there being a council election in September this year. That's been delayed, so we will be bringing a update to council recommending that that report be deferred until next year, as there is no need to be putting staff resources into that action at this particular point in time.
I'm just going to take the procedural motion. Is it a procedural? I don't know that it's
really
a procedural
motion.
No, I
in
don't
nature.
think
No,
so.
a procedural motion would be something.
It's just an urgent motion. Is it what councillors would have to agree to is it urgent, or I have to decide whether I'll take it as urgent and put it to the vote. At this point, I'm not going to take it as urgent motion, councillor. So we need to bring that back as a motion at the next council meeting if you choose to do so.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to take Councillor Shields. Councillor Morris, did you have your hand up, Councillor Morris? No. Okay,
No.
so it was Shields, then Horval, then Baxter.
Just a question through you, Madam Mayor. Is Councillor Horval referring to the references to Macleay Valley or Macleay Valley Council or whatever it may be in the actual attachment, the documents? Because they're actually from Ethos Urban and OTM, so obviously we're not able to change the consultant's documents.
Yes, you can.
Yes, we can. We ask for the document. We can have it redrafted. We can have it amended. We amended the VPA without going back to the community, so we can amend any document given to us to actually represent what we stand for, which is we're Kempsey Shire Council.
But is that what you're referring to, that they referred to us as Macleay Valley Council in the document?
They do, in 4 places.
Relevance to this decision, Madam Mayor.
So that's a point of order on relevance to the motion.
Motion in front of us is to do with community infrastructure strategy. It's not the naming of the description of the Macleay Valley.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment.
Just a moment. I'm just going to take the point of order. So about the name, does that relate to the notes of proposed engagement activities, current pandemic situation in the report? Endorses the draft infrastructure strategy. The naming doesn't, to present any further report and final draft document after the completion of the engagement phase. So we're just really looking at the proposed engagement activities where this could probably come up. So I'll take your point of order and uphold it, but we've got Director Fish that would like to speak, and then you've got an amendment, Councillor.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, I'll just make a brief comment. The references that Councillor Horval is referring to in terms of Macleay Valley Shire Council are within the audit report, and they are obviously, those 4 occasions are obviously in error, so they can be amended. But I will point out that the document that Council is considering for exhibition here, or the primary document, is the community infrastructure strategy, not obviously the audit report. So the primary document for exhibition is the actual strategy.
Thank you. The amendment, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, my amendment is to deal with the fact that we've got documents in front of us that continually use a colloquial term that we're Macleay Valley, and it's referred to throughout the documents, including the one that Director Fish just referenced. And so I would like to amend point 2 to read, endorse the draft community infrastructure strategy after amending all documents attached to this recommendation so as to replace 70 instances of Macleay Valley with Kempsey Shire and replacing the 4 instances of Macleay Valley Shire with Kempsey Shire. And in brackets, your future places and spaces for the next phase of community engagement. So I'm just...
Do I have a second now? Councillor Morris.
So if I may, Madam Mayor, I'd like to speak to my amendment.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, we've got and I'd like people to take this on board and not worry about upsetting people, but to take on board the fact that we have a trust problem with the community in the fact that we say one thing and we're possibly going to do something different. We are constantly having references to Macleay Valley in all sorts of documents, continually, when even in the documents, the Macleay Valley synopsis or the outline shows us talking about Kempsey Shire Council. It's talking about the same population. It's talking about the same area. And we have not yet moved to rename the council to Macleay Valley Council. It's a possibility, and it involves many things that we should be considering at the report that's going to come from council on the cost of changing names and whether there's going to be any chance of a success, and are there alternative names? So we're continually pushing the idea that it's commonly held that it's the Macleay Valley, but we know the Macleay Valley from the government documents stretches all the way to Armidale. We know that the Macleay Valley doesn't include President and Cundabung because they are in the Hastings Valley, and that's government documents, not my documents. I'm not making it up.
Sorry, Councillor, just a moment. There was a point of order from Councillor Patterson in relation to relevance.
Yeah,
I'm not going to uphold
9.3,
it.
Madam Mayor.
I'm not going to uphold it because it's to do with his amendment about changing the name. But Councillor Horville is arguing about whether we do or we don't, which is not relevant to the amendment. So, Councillor, if you could just
I'm arguing
make comments to why we need to do.
Yes,
do it
I'll address that, Madam Mayor.
and not cause and against of when we're going to do this, or if we are. Thank you.
I'll address that point as you made. Thank you, Madam Mayor. We are putting out an official document for reference for the community. If we're going to have trust with our community, we should be referring to ourselves proudly as Kempsey Shire, not as Macleay Valley. If people want to call it Macleay Valley, they'll have a chance in the poll further down the track. But at the moment, we are still officially Kempsey Shire. Colloquially, we know that the West Kempsey pub is across the road from the council chambers. It's officially a hotel under legislation. If you write a letter to them as the council, to that establishment, you won't be saying West Kempsey pub, you'll say West Kempsey Hotel, because that's the official name. We're still officially named Kempsey Shire. So as far as I'm concerned, it's almost push polling to continually use Macleay Valley when we haven't changed the name yet. We haven't changed the name, and we shouldn't change the name until we've consulted with the community. And of course, we've got to consult with the community according to this document. At the moment, we haven't consulted. We've just got a whole lot of people wanting to change and using it at every opportunity to say that. So for trust and integrity, I think we should replace the name and put Kempsey Shire in the place of where Macleay Valley has been written in these documents. I hope people have seen the reason that I've put forward and not have a prejudicial view, but actually have listened to what I said. We've got to stand up for ourselves as Kempsey Shire. That's what I was elected to. That's what all of you were elected to. And you haven't been changed to Macleay Valley Council yet.
Do I have a speaker against the amendment? It's Councillor McGinn.
Madam Mayor, I'm not going to speak. I'm not going to waste time on this, but I would like to reintroduce my urgent motion at the end of this discussion, please.
So you're going to move a foreshadowed motion?
Well, I'd like to move an urgent motion.
It doesn't need to be an urgent motion. It can be a foreshadowed motion.
Well, I'd like to move it. This is after this discussion, so I'd like.
Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, you've already ruled this out of order, and it has to be brought up at the next council meeting. That was your ruling.
Well, it's very obvious that it is.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to
excuse me.
foreshadowed motion.
I can rule. Councillor McGinn can't bring in a urgent procedural motion at this point. I've ruled that out of order. The only motion changes that Councillor McGinn can instigate are either an amendment to the amendment or a foreshadowed motion.
Okay, can I try it as a foreshadowed motion and you can rule if it's out of order?
It can be a foreshadowed motion, which means it needs to be substantially different to the motion that we have in front of us, or a negative.
Well, it's actually a negative to the amendment.
Yes, you can use a foreshadowed motion.
So I'm not sure, but given that Councillor Horville is off on another one of his rants,
Point of order, Madam Mayor.
Order. Thank you, Councillor McGinn.
Could you uphold that, please, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I take that back.
Thank you. You apologise?
I apologise.
Thank you.
Unreservedly. That for the rest of the council's term, that no recommendations or further discussions or amendments be taken regarding any documents that use the colloquial term the Macleay Valley or similar to be replaced with Kempsey Shire Council, because the colloquial term Macleay Valley is well known by locals as being referring to the Kempsey Shire Council LGA.
So what you're asking, what your foreshadowed motion would be the recommendation with a 0.4. Is that what you're saying?
That's fine, yes.
Okay, so we have a foreshadowed motion. We have a...
Is that a foreshadowed motion, Madam Mayor, or an amendment?
Oh, no, it's a foreshadowed motion because we've got to deal with Councillor Horville's amendment first.
I speak against the amendment, Chair.
Point of order, Madam Mayor.
Yes, Councillor.
On the procedural part of your rulings, if this amendment is voted down, you then cannot bring forward a foreshadowed motion because it will replace the actual whole 1, 2 and 3 that's in the original motion. So I'm saying that the amendment can be voted down, but if the substantive motion is then voted up, the foreshadowed motion can't be dealt with. If it's voted down, and only then can we have the foreshadowed motion brought forward.
I'll ask the General Manager. I don't believe you're correct.
The way I believe it'll happen, and Mr. Thorogood might just make sure I'm correct with this as well, you will vote on the motion as Councillor Horville has put it at the moment. If it gets up, it gets up. If it is lost, Council would go back to the substantive motion, which it may amend. And in that amendment, you can amend it how you wish and how it might be accepted, and then you would vote on that amendment.
But if we go back to the substantive motion, which is the first motion that we're amending, there could be a foreshadowed motion to that.
There could be, well, you wouldn't have a foreshadowed motion, you would amend it.
Oh, and then
you'd have a foreshadowed motion contingent on that.
You could put the suggested point 4 into what was the original motion.
My argument to that would be that it's substantially different to the original motion.
That would be your ruling.
Can I ask Councillor, not Councillor, General Manager Thorogood, not General Manager Thorogood, now I am confused, the Manager of Governance.
Yeah, this gets a little bit complex. Councillor Horville has now brought this business before Council by making his amendment. So we are debating this. Councillors can't amend his amendment to be a direct negative of his amendment. I don't see that it would be out of order to accept a further amendment was this amendment to be defeated.
I intend to amendment.
That was the negative.
So on the basis that you could go, should this be lost, Council could move the original points 1, 2 and 3 along with the point 4, which were along the lines of what Councillor McGinn had set out.
Okay, we'll go that way.
Yep.
You can, just a moment. So everybody's clear of what we're doing. We're going to deal with the amendment, which is in front of us, which is Councillor Horville's amendment, seconded by Councillor Morris. If that amendment is lost, we go back to the original motion, which is as printed, and then there is the opportunity for anyone to move an amendment to that.
I intend to move an amendment on the original motion, Madam Mayor, if this amendment from Councillor Horville is lost. Because
let's deal with it. Let's deal with the amended motion. We have had a speaker for. Now, you want to speak against the motion, the amendment, Chair. And then we will deal with the amendment.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to appeal to Councillor Horville on the back of everything we've been through this morning about costs. Would Councillor Horville accept his amendment be changed such that in the brackets it would say to the public, some of them who actually might read the attachment, that to let the public know the reference to Macleay Valley in the attachments.
Point of order, Councillor. You're actually not speaking against the motion. You're making adjustments and highlighting either foreshadowed motion.
I'm saying not to put that, to change it. That's what I'm saying there, Councillor Horville. Such that the public we say to the public, that was a mistake by the auditors or the people who wrote the report, and it should refer to Kempsey Shire Council, close brackets. Now that we would avoid the cost of somebody having to go through all of those documents, changing all the names. All we're doing is telling the public, there you go, there's been a mistake.
Question. Sorry, could you hear me? You're speaking for or against or a question?
I put the amendment.
We've had a speaker for, we speaker against. I need to.
If no one else speaks, can we put the amendment?
For the amendment?
If no one else speaks, can we put the amendment?
If no one else speaks, we can put the amendment. I put the amendment. All in favour of the amendment? All against the amendment? Actually, that's not how I was doing it. And it's very complicated when you look at this screen, and I do get the best one. The best way to do this is any dissent on the amendment. I'm going to ask you to call your name.
Yeah, Anna. Yes.
Anna, Sue, Mark,
Ashley.
Dean, Liz. Have I got everybody that's dissent? Anthony. Anybody else? I take it that voting for. Is there anyone
Councillor
voting?
Orville, your mic's still off.
I need you to indicate whether you're voting for or against or abstaining.
I'm voting for it, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Morris.
Abstaining.
Abstaining. Thank you. So now we're back to the substantive motion, which is the original motion, and is there any changes anyone wants to make to that one?
Madam Mayor, could I amend putting amendment? It's only that Councillor McGinn has a shadowed motion.
No, Councillor McGinn would have an amendment.
Oh, okay,
now.
so you've withdrawn the foreshadowed, making an amendment, Councillor McGinn?
Have I withdrawn? Sorry?
Councillor McGinn, are you doing an amendment to this?
Yes,
or
I have. I've texted it through to Daniel Thorogood.
have you got your? I can't hear you for some reason.
I'm on. I've texted it.
Here.
Yeah? I've texted it to Daniel, the wording.
It's worded to Daniel.
He's just typing it.
He's copying it. We'll just wait till he copies it. So
And gets it up on the screen, yeah.
Will it be point 4, Madam Mayor?
Are we still on? Everything's gone quiet.
We're just waiting for it to come up. It's up now. And the councillors call to order. The discussion that I was having with the general manager was around whether it needed to be an amendment or a foreshadowed motion, because the substantive motion doesn't mention at all about Clay Valley. But we're going to take it as an amendment.
Mayor, I move a procedural motion,
Yes.
and that is that items 1 to 3 be separated from 4. I support 1 to 3, but I cannot support 4. So therefore, I request procedurally that the items be separated into separate motions for the purposes of voting.
So it'll be an amendment.
No, that's a valid procedural motion, but it will require a seconder.
It's a procedural motion. We can do that.
A split is a valid procedural motion.
Okay, but I'll require a seconder. Do I have a seconder and a vote? So it'll require, to split them will require a vote and then a seconder. Do I have a seconder? No, don't have a seconder, so that's lapses. So we're back to this. This motion that we have in front of us, which is as an amendment. Is it an amendment or is it the substantive motion now?
Become the motion, hasn't it?
Who moved it originally?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, I had a lag there. I would be a seconder for Councillor Morris.
So they're separated now.
Only if we vote on it.
Only if we vote on it.
Yes. So I vote. I need to take the vote on whether councillors wish it to be separated or not. So is there any dissent on keeping to separating them? So I've got Councillor Shields, I've got Councillor. The dissent is on what you're voting on is whether we take this as one motion or two motions. The first motion would be 1, 2 and 3, so that would get voted on separate to item number 4, which would be separate.
So you're voting on Councillor Morris's procedural motion to separate them.
And then you...
So you're either voting for it or against separating it.
And if we separate, then we have two votes to vote on two things. Nothing. So, do I have any dissent on separating the motions?
Councillor Saul, Councillor McGinn, Councillor Shields, Councillor Patterson. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
So everybody else is okay with separating the yes, 5-4. So we're now separated. We're now going to vote on two separate motions. All right?
Can I ask questions about the non we vote on the non?
There's going to be two. What non?
9.3 Community Infrastructure Strategy.
Do we have a microphone turned on?
Recommendation, not a notice of motion, councillor.
It's a motion, not a
Can we have microphones turned on, please, so we can hear what's being said?
Sorry,
Now, Councillor Baxter, does everybody now understand that there is two motions before us?
Can I
vote on?
Can I ask questions?
Can you just understand this? There is two motions now in front of us that we're going to be voting on. The first one we're going to vote on is the recommendation that was 1, 2 and 3. Then when that either passes or it doesn't, we will then vote on the second motion.
Right.
Either way.
Question, Madam Mayor.
Number 3? 1, 2 and 3 needs a seconder. Do I have a seconder for 1, 2 and 3, which is what the original recommendation was?
Yep, second that.
Question, Madam Mayor.
Yes, councillor.
Madam Mayor, I've not seen this before. Could we check to make sure that you can split a motion that was put out on the agenda into two motions? I've never seen that happen before. I'm just surprised that that's what we're doing. Could you substantiate that in the Code of Meeting Practice, please?
Thank you, for requesting some clarification, and Manager Governance.
Sorry, just give me one moment.
We'll just give him a moment, and then he'll come back with explaining it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor, can I just...
Yes, Councillor. Yes, Councillor Williams.
It's 11:30. We've talked about nothing but a name, and not once have we said anything about anything in that report other than the name.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable.
This is absolutely ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of democracy. It's so hard, isn't it?
Doesn't have to be.
Okay. Have we found this?
Madam Mayor, can we please have the screen lowered so that we can read what's on
Yes,
the screen?
Councillor.
while Mr. Thorogood's looking for that, my understanding of the code of meeting practice, how it works, is that we haven't actually split two things that are actually on the agenda. The item 4 has actually been brought onto the agenda today. It wasn't actually on the published agenda at all. It was now being brought onto the agenda because Councillor Horville raised it in his previous amendment that was actually lost, which then gave it the opportunity to be raised by subsequent councillors. So I do not believe there's anything in the code of meeting practice that would prohibit us from doing, or prohibit you from doing what you're actually doing by separating this out into two separate motions.
Can we answer? All right. So now we're going back to the split motion. The first one I'm going to deal with and ask for people to talk for or against, where people would have the opportunity to talk about the community infrastructure strategy, is as is in your business papers, item 1, 2 and 3. We note the proposed engagement activities modified for the current pandemic situation as outlined in this report. We endorse the draft community infrastructure strategy or future places and spaces for the next phase of community engagement, and be presented with a further report and final draft strategy, which possibly would change some of that error, or after the completion of the engagement.
Move that way,
phase.
Madam.
I think it's been moved, and I think it's been seconded. It's been moved by
Yes. Morris.
I have a question, Madam Mayor.
It was moved by Councillor.
That was me, actually.
It was Councillor Baxter. And who seconded it?
Anthony.
And Councillor Patterson.
You know?
Okay, so have I got any dissent on that recommendation? Anyone's...
Can I ask questions
Who does?
after we've voted for it? Or should...
Who's got questions? Mark, have you got questions about...
The report. Thank you, Chair. Getting back to the report, the Community Infrastructure Strategy, 9.3. Firstly, I'd like to thank the outstanding report. This is a magnificent guiding document for our valley. The people that put this document together should be praised. On page 28, at the bottom, it is said, quote, other than a few gaps, the valley is well supplied with community infrastructure. Close quote. Could the Director expand on what a few gaps means as far as community infrastructure?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Baxter, are you referring to the strategy or the audit?
On page 28. No, I think it's on the front page.
No, it's on the page.
The 28 of the document.
Of the agenda.
Yeah.
Councillor, could you just clarify what page of the actual strategy it is? Though there's page numbers on the bottom of it.
No, it's on the
I'm not in the...
on the agenda. Sorry.
Page 28.
Sorry. Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. The audit report certainly identifies, largely obviously states that in terms of community infrastructure, we are largely well provided for, other than some gaps there. Probably the main items that are recognised surround the southwest Rock area in particular, given that's our main growth area. So the forecasts into the future, given that growth, there are specific items of community infrastructure where there will be gaps in future. And the main items that are identified really relate to sporting fields and also library and community type spaces within that area. And similarly, within the Kempsey area, the library is also raised as well. So they're the main items, but certainly the audit outlines in detail for each precinct within the Shire what the the current rate of provision is, how that compares to in benchmarks in provision of that infrastructure, and obviously identifies where those gaps are.
Thank you, Director. More question, Chair. Now, the draft strategy, Director, on page 7 of the draft infrastructure strategy, the report states on page 7 that the youth accounts for 20% of all the crime in the valley, and that it is important to provide places, spaces and services for our youth. It goes on to say on page 21 that the council is the provider of the youth strategy. My question is regarding the stalled development of the Kempsey Youth Centre at the old ambulance station. The question is, does our youth strategy include or drive the development of this resource? A resource that was fast-tracked exactly 12 months ago this month by our State Member of Parliament in response to a spate of youth suicides in the valley.
Through Madam Mayor, Councillor, just referring to your comment that Council is the provider of this youth strategy. I'm unsure where you're actually.
That's on page.
Referencing that specific comment.
That's on page 21 of the draft strategy document.
Actually, what I'm reading there says that says prepare youth strategy, and it says prepare a youth strategy to ensure the Shire provides community infrastructure that responds to our young people's needs. So that's not consistent with what you're just saying. So I think what it's referring there in terms of the youth strategies, it relates to obviously the provision of obviously community infrastructure, and the strategy obviously identifies that there's a need for more things for young people to do, and also to reflect their range of interests.
I'm just trying to find it.
Chipmunks in it. Okay, Councillor, you got more questions?
I've obviously got the wrong page there.
Or the wrong document.
I think underpinning, through you, Madam Mayor, underpinning what this document does.
Just a moment.
Page 21, sorry, sir.
Underpinning what this document does is actually, this is about infrastructure. It's not about other operational activities. It's actually about infrastructure where things can occur. The infrastructure that council has and is planned through this strategy will allow for a range of facilities that can be accessed by young people. Outside of that, council, through its community partnership program and other activities, is working with a wide range of agencies in terms of service provision to young people. And we certainly are continuing to push with our local state member the development of the old ambulance site for the purposes it was originally put up for last year.
Thank you, GM. Just to answer your question, Director, it's top of page 21. Top of page 21 in the document, it says prepare a youth strategy, and it says there in the second column the council is the provider. Yeah, anyway, thank you, Director, thank you, General Manager.
Is there any dissent on the motion? Thank you. That motion has been accepted unanimously. We now go to the second.
Move that way.
Or
is it already moved?
Please.
Separately. I beg your pardon.
Can I have it on the screen, please?
Someone's scrolling their mouse and it's clicking, and you can actually hear it coming right through the microphones.
Oh, is that what it is? I thought it was a chipmunk somewhere. Okay. So, Councillor Baxter and Councillor Patterson,
I'd like to speak to this if I could.
when we've split it, we've got the same
No,
mover and seconder.
no.
I'll move it, please.
It's Patterson. It's up there, Liz.
Yes. Okay, to speak to it, Councillor McGinn.
Well, I'd first like to say that this motion is not seeking to influence a future name change or to stifle future discussion on any name changes or suggestions of that into the future. The reason I'm putting this forward today is for the exact reason that happened today, and that is how we got sidetracked from the actual agenda item into a discussion about Kempsey Shire Council's name. And this serves only to distract us from the important business of council. This is the reason I'm recommending this, that no further discussion or amendment be taken on any documents. So the documents that are presented to us that, for example, that has occurred today in that sort of instance. And that's the reason I believe we should support this recommendation.
Councillor Holborn.
Madam Mayor, may I ask a question of the General Manager, please?
Yes, Councillor Holborn.
Mr. General Manager, if this motion is accepted and becomes the resolution, it actually says that no recommendation or further discussion about using the Macleay Valley. When you come back with the report on changing the name, will that report now have to exclude any reference to Macleay Valley?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's not my reading. What this is actually saying is that during this term, should a document come to council that uses the colloquial term Macleay Valley or similar, that the council is not able to debate the use of that term in the council if it is included in a report or attachments to that report.
That's exactly the intent.
So, Mr. General Manager, a report that comes to council about the name change is a document. It will have to not use the word Macleay Valley, according to my reading of it.
That is not my reading of it at all. It actually is quite the opposite. It could actually use the term Macleay Valley. It just doesn't allow the councillors to debate, as they have today, the use of that as opposed to Kempsey Shire Council. It permits staff and or consultants to use the term Macleay Valley as a colloquial term in any of the documents, and the council, when they are on the floor of council, those documents will be discussed, cannot actually debate, as they have today, the use of that term.
Mr. General Manager, equally it would preclude any councillor from...
You haven't been called to talk.
Sorry.
Can you please raise your hand if that's what you want to do? I just couldn't see.
I just want to seek clarification on a point.
Yeah, I get that. Councillor Morris.
Mr. General Manager, with the way it's worded, if when the report comes back about changing the name and it's recommended that it be Macleay Valley Council, would that preclude any councillor from suggesting it be replaced with Kempsey Shire Council or a similar term to that, or retaining the name Kempsey Shire Council?
I don't
need to make sure that that doesn't prevent such consideration when that ultimate report comes back, unless we are saying no, the only thing it can possibly be is Macleay Valley.
I don't believe that's the intent of this motion.
The intent, the wording of it could be complied that way unless it's specifically spelled out.
It could be by some. It's certainly, I think, quite clear amongst this group of councillors that that's not the intent. And should Councillor McGinn wish to modify it, that would be up to her. But it's certainly not the way I, as the General Manager, would be interpreting it.
Madam Mayor, can we put
Just a minute. No, we can't. We haven't had speakers for or against. Councillor McGinn, do you wish to consider modification of the terminology to make it absolutely clear of what the intent is to anyone that may misconstrue it?
If there is a need to lock that down, I'm happy to go with any recommended further words. I mean, you could have a point too that says...
with the exception of the report on the possible name change.
Exactly.
Just be added to the end.
I mean, this is just to stop this nonsense that's happening now and in the last discussion.
Okay.
So, shall we add a point 2? Is that would that solve the problem? to make it absolutely clear that
So
this
what?
does not refer to documents specifically talking about the name change, a potential name change at some time in the future. But it's not.
Oh, sorry, yes. What Daniel has added in there, sorry, I couldn't see it for looking. Third line down towards the end, Kempsey Shire Council, with the exception of the report on the possible name change.
Perfect.
Okay. Councillor.
Change that to with the exception of.
Councillor Morris wanted to ask a question, I think, didn't he? No, he did ask his question.
And I just want to ask, can we change that with the exception of the reports on the name change? Because there might be more than one report.
That's a good idea. You
I'd
happy
actually
with that,
already corrected that to say of
McGinn?
any report.
Yeah, it's got any report.
Any report.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Horval.
Madam Mayor, may I speak against the amendment, please, or the motion?
Yes, you may.
Thank you very much. The intent of this motion is once again to stop the councillor speaking, not just me, but any councillor who wishes to speak on this in the future. We've already had a close down of democracy on Plumbers Lane. We've had a close down on writing a letter about the interchange.
Point of order.
I don't need the point of order. I'm making a point about closing down democracy.
You're not closing down democracy.
Councillor McGinn.
Madam Mayor, may I
I'm
continue?
not upholding your point of order.
I understand Councillor McGinn can't listen to all the some things, but I would like to make the point about democracy, Madam Mayor, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Councillor, you need to speak against the recommendation, not about democracy.
This is going against democracy. It's saying we can't talk about something, Madam Mayor. We can't talk about Plumbers Lane. We can't talk about the Crescent Interchange because we've moved motions saying we can't talk about it. And in a democracy, any one of you fellow councillors has a right to raise any issue that you think is relevant to council. And under democracy, you can vote against someone else's opinion or a motion or a notice of motion or amendment. When you say we can't discuss it, you are saying there's no democracy on this issue. We are going to close down the minority because we're the majority. The minority is part of what democracy is. And this motion is actually shutting down an issue that is substantial for many people in the Shire. We are closing democracy down. It's a simple matter. You cannot vote in favour of this motion if you think it's okay to shut down anything you disagree with. I value people disagreeing with me because that is democracy. But here, someone disagrees with me, yep, we'll shut him down. We won't let him talk about any issue that he or she wishes to raise. Councillors, you have rights. You are speaking for the community and you should be able to speak on any issue that is to do with what the community is thinking. And the name change is something the community is talking about. I raise it for the simple reason we must go with facts. But you are saying we don't want to hear the facts. We're going to go, no. Don't talk about that issue. Girls and boys, sit back in your seats and think about democracy.
Point of order, councillor. That referral to boys and girls I find quite disrespectful and offensive to councillors. We are not in a school classroom here. So,
Madam Mayor, I apologise for that. I do apologise.
And
I'm just getting quite frustrated with the idea, Madam Mayor, and I hope you understand the frustration.
Thank you, councillor. You can continue.
Thank you. I understand your frustration and other people's frustration, like Councillor William, saying we don't want to hear about this. But there are things we don't want to hear about. When it comes to hearing about the financial plan, I really find it hard to listen, Mr. Mitchell, but I do listen. And I say, oh, I don't want to hear this anymore. We'll shut that down. No, we don't. We keep listening because that's our requirement as elected members of Kempsey Shire. So I'm saying to you, we shouldn't be shutting down Kempsey Shire's democracy, and that's what's happening here. If you vote in favour of this, you're saying we can't talk about that topic because it's wasting time.
Is
No,
it
nothing we're doing with wasting time. We're a democratic institution called council. And so I'm suggesting that this not be supported, Madam Mayor.
Put the motion.
No, Councillor McGinn, would you like to close debate? I can't put the motion. I haven't had a speaker for or against. Do I have any other speakers for?
If no one else speaks.
You can if no one else speaks. I would just like to ask Councillor McGinn, would you like the opportunity about closing debate around democracy?
Oh, Madam Mayor, this is not about shutting down debate. Madam Mayor, what we should be doing as a council is concentrating on the important things. And this has just shown exactly
Important
today.
view.
Councillor Hallville has given us a perfect demonstration of why this is so important that this recommendation be voted and supported. We are wasting time on things that are unimportant. We will have
Your judgment
when we discuss Kempsey Shire Council's potential name change, but this is not what this motion is about. This motion does not seek to shut down any debate. Indeed, this motion does go with democracy, and the majority of councillors over every time that Councillor Hallville has brought up the trying to amend documents where Kempsey Shire Council has been
I've
referred
done it once before.
Councillor, don't interject, please.
has been rejected every time he has tried to do that. That is democracy in action, because the democracy is in action with the majority saying they don't want to waste time on that sort of discussion. This recommendation seeks to amend the problem that this has been and to get us back on track discussing the more important part of motions, and it is not about referring to documents' names and trying.
Thank you, Councillor. That's closed debate. Is there any dissent on the motion before us? Councillor Hallville and Councillor Morris. That's all. Thank you, councillors. We will now move on to item 9.4. Oh, hang on. Was that moved in consensus? No, it was withdrawn.
I'm moving that motion, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Saul. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Patterson. Okay. Do I have any questions or dissent? No. Very good. Voting. It's unanimous.
Yeah, a very quick question. I think Councillor Mr. Fish can answer it very quickly, but I think the public should know. The people of Stuarts Point have been waiting for the sewage scheme for a long time, and on page 34, Madam Mayor, no, 35, down the bottom on the program, it talks about a delivery timetable of late 2023 is identified. Is there any chance that this project to give sewage to Stuarts Point can be delivered any sooner than that timetable?
Through you, Madam Mayor, based on the approval processes that we need to go through and the timeline of the procurement process and obviously the scale of the project, I'd consider that unlikely, Councillor Hallville, but certainly we're trying to resource it such that to move the project as obviously as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
No, no dissent. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We're going to 9.5, which is...
Madam Mayor, could I move that with a slight amendment, please?
And the amendment is?
Would be a new point 3, Madam Mayor. And it says any opportunities for grant funding that arise should be utilised to reapply for the unsuccessful applicants as shown in 2A and 2B.
Question, Madam Mayor, is that something that's done already by our staff?
No, not necessarily.
Can I have an answer to that, please?
With any projects that council has, like this, like the library refit, potential programs for young people and festivals for young people, council would be continually seeking grant applications for those sorts of projects and programs wherever they are applicable to the funding guidelines. It's just our normal practice.
So, Madam Mayor,
Is it necessary or unnecessary, or is it business as usual? Does it create a problem having 0.3?
Point 3 isn't needed. Point 3 will make absolutely no difference. We'll do it anyway, where there's funding guidelines that are suitable. So you can include it or you could exclude it. It won't make any difference to staff.
Okay.
Second the motion.
thank you.
Been moved and been seconded, and that's been added.
Madam Mayor, amendment if I may.
Could I talk to the motion first, Madam Mayor, please?
You can talk to the motion first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The opportunity to reapply should always be put there. And even though I understand the General Manager would normally reapply for these, coming up in the notice of motion on the library at South West Rocks and the Community Centre, it was applied for in 2017 and it hasn't been reapplied for as far as I can tell. I can stand to be corrected on that since 2017. If we specify that we're going to take more grant opportunities for both these very important projects on the Kempsey Library refit and the Youth Leadership Program, well then it's there in the books for the continuation of application for grants when they arise. So I think it just should be there as a very simple addition to the original recommendation.
Councillor Saul had an amendment, then I'll take Councillor McGinn, then I'll take Councillor Shields, then McGinn.
Madam Mayor, I was just going to move an amendment that we go back to the original motion.
Second that.
We've got to deal with the amendment first. So before I get you to speak to your amendment, I'll take Councillor Shields and I'll take Councillor McGinn.
I'm actually speaking against the amendment. Is that all right?
No, because Councillor Saul hasn't spoken for it, and I haven't asked him. Does he want?
Sorry, against the original, the addition of 0.3.
That's
okay. So you're going to speak for the amendment.
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Saul, you reserve your right.
You, Madam Mayor.
Okay, I'll take Councillor Shields.
I don't see why, as councillors, we're continually micromanaging what the staff do. The General Manager just said that this is business as usual. We don't need to be this prescriptive all the time. Let's let them use their actual business now, our staff. Let's back them. If we say things like 0.3, then if an actual grant opportunity comes up, which I'm thinking there are not going to be a great deal of grant opportunities considering the current outlays of the federal and state government, then you might be precluding, say, the South West Rocks Library, because we've said that we're going to actually follow up these two items. Let's just let our staff choose. The opportunities change all the time, given our COVID-19 response and our bushfire recovery. Let's actually take those opportunities as they come. There might be far more prudent projects that come up that we might be applying for our limited grant funding that will be available. Let's let the staff do their job.
Here, here.
Do I have a speaker against the amendment?
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Councillor Williams.
I need to be excused. I'm sorry, but it's something that's just popped up. And I'm not 100% sure if I'll be back.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Williams is leaving the meeting. So, Councillor Hobble, you're speaking against the amendment.
I am, Madam Mayor. Thank you. It's in the Local Government Act that we can give directions. And it's a very simple thing. It's a direction that the General Manager has already said it will make no difference to what staff does, but it will still be there to show that this council is giving directions to the staff to make sure that we are on the line, to make sure that the Kempsey Shire Library refit and that we pursue the Youth Leadership Program funding grant. So we're actually giving a simple direction. It shouldn't need to be discussed and therefore going back to the original recommendation, but that is no longer the recommendation, but it's the motion that I've moved with point 3. I would suggest that we defeat this amendment of Councillor Sauls and make sure that we're just giving a general direction that is documented, that we want to pursue both these really important projects.
Do I have any dissent against? Oh, no speakers. Any more speakers? Councillor McGinn. Councillor McGinn.
Thank you. Sorry, Madam Mayor. I'm speaking for the amendment, and we've just had a very long discussion earlier in the meeting today about our operating plan and how we need a workshop to discuss where our priorities are. And yet here we have an example of where by recommendation, we're not even working through a workshop to have a look at all the other things that might come up, and we're already throwing things back into the pot and giving directions to our staff without considering the entire program and all of our expenses and income. I suggest we don't have that we adopt this amendment and that we wait for the workshop to actually get down into the nitty-gritty and show where our priorities are and have a really good and robust discussion then, rather than starting to already pick out favourites by doing this. So I commend Councillor Saul for going back to the original motion as was originally published. So I support the amendment.
Do I have any more speakers against? I put the amendment. Any dissent on the amendment? Councillor Horville, Councillor Morris. The amendment has been upheld. It becomes the motion. Do I have any dissent on the motion? The motion has been passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll go on to 9.6 has been done. 9.7, we have a local preference purchasing procedure. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor McGinn. And seconded by Councillor Shields, in actual fact. She had her hand up at the same time as Councillor McGinn.
Unless Councillor Shields would like to move it, I'm happy to second it.
No, it's all right, Councillor McGinn. I saw yours first and at the same time.
I'm not sure that this needs much discussion. To me, it's when I read this in the papers, I thought this was a really good idea.
It was taken out of the block, so there must be a question or a amendment.
That's right. It was originally in the block.
Sorry about that. Councillor Horville, you have an amendment?
Yes, I withdrew it, Madam Mayor, but based on the question I think I asked earlier, but I should like to confirm this. In the earlier motion, we moved that the local preference purchasing procedure be changed, and I'm just wondering whether we should amend this motion to reflect that earlier motion. So I'd just like to have direction from the General Manager, if possible, Madam Mayor.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as I indicated before, Council could move both of these motions, and what will end up occurring from it is that the procedure will be updated to reflect the changes that were exhibited after the November Council meeting and the changes that were resolved earlier today.
So we don't need to amend it, Mr. General Manager?
I don't believe we do.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was going to amend it, so thank you, I won't.
Put the motion.
Any dissent on the motion? Been moved unanimously. Passed unanimously, sorry.
So do we now go into confidential?
We've got a long way to go before confidential. We're up to 9.8. Oh, it's done.
9.9.
9.9's done. We've got 10.1. There's a notice of motion. Councillor Horville.
Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had a long discussion with the General Manager on this, and we do need to be shovel ready. So I'm moving this motion to have a suite of programs and projects ready in case there is federal or state government grants coming through as part of the COVID-19 funding to keep the economy going. So I move the motion as written, and I welcome any comments or questions.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Morris. Do I have any speakers?
Now, Madam Mayor?
Sorry?
Do I get to speak very quickly to it now?
Oh, I thought that's what you were doing.
No, I just moved it.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Thank you. Yes, it's again, I'd like to thank the General Manager and the staff for the substantial help in getting all the information together in the background on the South West Rex Library, and as translated into South West Library and Community Centre, and also a council service centre. The history goes back to the year 2000, when the library was found to be undersized for population. So it's 20 years on, and part of the documentation that has been presented to council today talks about this many times over. On the page 38 of the operating plan, it talks about pursue funding for the South West Rex Library. And on the community infrastructure, it talks on page 7, it talks about the need for visions of having a library, a new and better library. Page 12, page 9, page 34, key priority. All those documents actually support the idea that we pursue the funding for the South West Rocks Community and Library Centre. And the other issues there, that not exclusively all of them, but possibly correctly, we need to look at replacing the wooden bridges on the Macleay upriver area, in the Shire, of course. The Kempsey Airport Adventure Centre, which is also called the Macleay Airport Adventure Centre, I think. And tourism facilities, we've got to jump in and try and be ready for having tourists come back to us, and we need incentives. And I was just thinking about, as I said before, the background of my screenshot there shows the Green Hill. We've actually talked about it on a work tour we did before. Having a substantial expenditure there to make an excellent photo point for people to pull up, proper parking, proper fencing, possibly an air walk out over the towards the river, and giving tourists a place to stop, have an information centre there on the Dungutty people. Those sorts of things will add to our tourist incentives, and we need to have that and other items that could be determined by the staff that will be shovel ready and bring expenditure in our area from having projects ready to go if there is a grant opportunity, and we should be pursuing this, and I'm sure the staff will be able to pursue it really well if we say, please have them shovel ready. And that's what this notice of motion is asking for us to do. So I request you to support this, please.
Do I have any speakers? Oh, Councillor, I'll take Councillor McGinn, then I'll take Councillor Patterson. Councillor McGinn.
My first question, firstly a question which goes pretty well in line with the last discussion of the last recommendation. I would assume that if the General Manager could just advise if you do this already.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, developing a list in preparation for COVID-19 recovery is something we're actually currently working on. Comments very similar to the last one, whether this is passed or not passed. It's totally up to the council. The staff will still be doing it.
So my question,
I guess I should actually add the significance of the difference of this would be point 3. However, that would only be able to be implemented should the funding on offer relate to community facilities. We've already had requests from the federal government for funding for roads, as an example. So obviously we can't put the library forward for that. It would only be applicable where it suited the actual grants on offer.
So my I have to speak against this. Look, I understand the idea, the motivation behind what Councillor Horville's saying, but once again, here we are putting the cart before the horse. Why ever we would pick out one particular project, for example, the Southwest Rocks Library, and in that one in particular, I have concerns. But whilst it's a very worthy project in the future, why we would pick one out and say this one above all others is our number one priority really concerns me. It concerns me because we've just talked about again earlier in the meeting about having a workshop on our operating plan for the next year and our long-term financial plans, and understanding the issues that we have financially as a council. So we haven't had that workshop yet, and here we are again putting one of our pet projects ahead of everything else, ahead of the pack, when we haven't yet looked at our entire Shire's financial desires and community desires, and we haven't got that feedback yet from the community by putting our operating plan out. So I do believe this is putting the cart before the horse. In particular, my issue with the Southwest Rocks Library and Community Centre is not that it wouldn't be a worthy project, and not that Southwest Rocks, which is identified for growth in the future, shouldn't be worthy of such a project, but we haven't got a design. We don't know if this could possibly go into, say, a leased building, or we're going to build a building, or we don't have a budget. We don't have a place for it to go yet. I mean, there's so much background work that has to be done on this Southwest Rocks Library and Community Centre to elevate it to our number one heading the list item, just to me is putting the cart before the horse. I cannot, I'm afraid, support it without, because there is just no background information. So I'm sorry, I just cannot support this motion.
Yeah.
Do I have Councillor Shields?
I think Councillor Patterson was next.
Oh, Councillor Patterson.
Madam Mayor,
Where are you? I've lost you. Yeah, okay.
do we need to have a speaker for? Because I'm speaking against it as well.
We'd need a speaker for, unless you've got a question.
Oh, I have a question to the General Manager. Did we not just discuss this earlier and decided that we have to have extraordinary workshop / meeting on deciding on budget planning, what's in and what's out in the future?
Through Madam Mayor, yes. However, that doesn't preclude, I don't believe, Council having a list of projects ready should we be offered stimulus funding for the COVID-19 recovery.
Can I just ask a question? That is what you're already doing.
We are already developing a list for that purpose.
Thank you. I need a speaker for the motion.
Madam Mayor, I'm not speaking for the motion. I'm more asking a question.
Yes.
Suggesting a change, and that is, can we ask this? Well, I'm suggesting we should probably ask the staff to develop a list of projects to be put forward, as point 1 says, and suggest that there be a workshop for the councillors to be involved in prioritising the list of projects for consideration, because to make them shovel ready, there's a reasonable amount of work and effort, and I think the councillors should have some input, seeing we do represent the community, as to what that list of projects should include, what is important enough to pursue to get shovel ready.
Bruce, isn't that really
General Manager?
Operating?
Just a moment, Councillor McGinn. General Manager.
Madam Mayor, we would actually look with that sort of thing, combining that with the budget workshop, because part of that workshop will be prioritising what projects you do, so it could be one and the same workshop.
So it could be added to that workshop.
I think it is part of that workshop, isn't it? That's what I would take it to be.
That workshop was more about correcting our budget situation, not looking at projects for funding, for grant funding into the future. So it expands what that workshop was about.
But grant funding or our budget all grant funding has implications on our budget, whether it's ongoing in capital works or whatever. There is always a budget implication on grant funding. I needed the general manager to answer that question. The question was, would it be discussed at that budget workshop? Could it be incorporated?
Needs to be brought forward.
Yes.
So the short answer to that is yes. I've got Councillor Shields. Are you speaking for or against, or you got a question?
Against, but I guess I could form that into a question.
Well, in that case, you certainly could, because Councillor Morris didn't speak for, but he just asked a question. So did Councillor Patterson. So going along that way, yes, you can.
Again, really, that was my intention when we were talking about a workshop, is we're prioritising funding. Like you said, our budget includes all of our spending. So my question was, wouldn't that be a good idea to incorporate that into our May councillor meeting? And I think for a lot of us, that was the intent, that we were going to come out of there with a list of priorities. And we were considering all projects holistically and collectively, rather than looking at individual projects now. And it would appear quite unhinged if we were to prioritise some projects, cherry pick some now, and then have our meeting next month to talk about everything together when we've already selected some projects without considering all of the projects.
Well said, Councillor Shields.
So I'm going to ask for, is there any dissent on the notice of motion?
Madam Mayor, I would like to speak. Finalise it, please.
Sorry, I haven't given you your right of reply. You don't take your right of reply.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I would like to say right now that as a council meeting, we can prioritise. Now, I presume you've all read all the information that I provided to you. Councillor Baxter, you've read it all right to the end, where the information that was provided in the 2017 application for funding, and it was rejected. But that information that was provided by the then General Manager was very pertinent and very substantial about why South West Rocks needs the library and community centre. It was there and then. And here it is, starting in 2000, and here it is in 2020, and we still haven't got a substantial, adequate library facility for the second largest populated area of our shire, South West Rocks. I would ask you to think about that. We can make a decision that put that at the top of the list, that hopefully will get full funding from the state and federal government. We are allowed to do that, and we are handing to the staff how to go about implementing that. That's in the 4 points. We are saying, yes, there are priorities, but here we are, we're making a priority now. If you've read all the documentation that goes with this, you'll know it should be a priority. And we can do that, and I haven't finished again.
He's making aspersions on
Councillor McGinn. Sorry, please don't interrupt. Point of order. Go on, Councillor.
Madam Mayor, the Councillor Patterson is saying we should wait off till July in his talk against the motion, and he's got that right to do it. I welcome it. But I'm saying that staff should be getting it ready now, not prioritising it in July. And council staff are able and ready to have a list and get on with the job. And that's what we're giving them. That's what we do as a council. We give directions on priorities that we think the community want. And the community of South West Rocks not only want the library, it's all through the documentation that we passed today and read today. It's all through there in the consultation with the community that we should be prioritising the library. We can do this. And the council staff can adequately deal with this motion if it is passed. So I'm asking you to reconsider your vote if you've been talking against it, and saying, let's give a direction. We can do this, and the staff will cope with it very easily. I ask you to...
Councillor Shields, you want to speak or you want to vote?
Question, please, Madam Mayor.
Yes, sorry, that was closed debate, so...
Am I able to ask a question or not?
You are able to ask a question.
To the General Manager, next month when we have our councillor meeting regarding our priorities and the budget, I'm assuming that we're going to have input from the staff as to where we're at with a lot of these projects. However, I noticed that the commentary in business paper regarding this one gives us a lot of historical data, but it doesn't actually give us the current data. And I understand this particular project of the library has changed quite a lot since this historical data. So would it be prudent to combine both sets of information, the historical and where we're at currently, in that meeting next month?
Through Madam Mayor, certainly with that workshop, we'll have a range of information on various projects and obviously a lot of our operational costs. In relation to this project specifically, you've just voted to put the community infrastructure plan on exhibition. Should you adopt that, the Southwest Rocks Library is a priority project in that infrastructure plan anyway.
And there are other priority projects that has highlighted. This is not the only one, isn't it?
That's correct.
Thank you, councillors. I'll take that one quick question, but the debate has been closed, so it needs.
I move an amendment, Madam Mayor.
Just a question to the General Manager, Madam Mayor.
We've closed debate. Sorry, councillor. And the right of reply has been done, so I have to take the vote, and I really shouldn't be taking any more questions. So unless it's a really vital question.
Yeah. Sorry, the question is about the library, because earlier this year and later last year we went on a tour out to Southwest Rocks, and we showed the possibility of a building with the possibility of a library being underneath it. That's current what Councillor Shields was talking about. That needs to be mixed into this whole conversation, and we do not want to.
I'm sorry. We had right of reply. I'm going to put the.
Is that an amendment?
I'm sorry. We were taking the vote. The amendment could have come before the right of reply.
Put the vote.
Could take an amendment after. You can't. Sorry, I can't after the right of reply, Councillor Morris. I've got to put it to the vote. So, is there any dissent on the notice of motion? Patterson, Shields, Saul, McGinn, Baxter, Campbell. That's it.
And I abstain.
And one abstention.
Does that mean you voted against it, Madam Mayor?
Technically, yes. Questions on notice. I'll take. Oh, this is going to be interesting. I'll go on the screen first. I'll go off the screen actually. So I'll take Councillor Patterson first.
No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Baxter.
No, thank you, Madam.
I don't need Robert Fish or Director Mitchell or Craig. Councillor Saul.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can councils be given costings to? I think this properly. Can councils be given the costings of memberships to associations that councils involved in? That's a complicated way of saying it, but of all the organisations we are a part of, I'd like to know the costings to membership for that, please.
There's not very many these days. It's hardly any.
Thank you.
Councillor Shields.
I apologise if this has been done because I haven't been into Southwest Rocks with the COVID-19 restrictions, but I had a conversation with Director Fish that there was going to be an external shower at Back Creek. There was talk at one point it was going to be fitted to the outside of the amenities block, but just where are we with that external shower at Back Creek? Because I'm hearing reports of like people washing their dogs in the hand basin, washing their feet, things like that, because there's no shower or tap to wash the sand off before you get in the car.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll just give a quick reply to that. I believe the intention is that the shower will probably be separate from the building, but so that would occur when the remaining foreshore works occur, which would obviously be following the completion of the footbridge, which obviously requires the old bridge to be removed.
So, sorry, Director Fish, is that budgeted in this financial year or that will have to go into the next?
through Madam Mayor, the work on the foreshore is a mixture of grant funding and council funding. Understanding it certainly was initially funded in this financial year. I just can't recall as to whether we have deferred any of that via the quarterly review process. But certainly the intention would be for the work within this calendar year.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor McGinn?
No, I have no questions.
Councillor Morris?
No questions.
Councillor Horval?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My questions. With respect to Resolution 2020.40 of Council meeting 17th of March, how has point 2, quote, publicises to the Kempsey Shire community the fact of the need for submissions, invites people to do so online, by email, by post, or by bringing submissions to the Customer Service Centre by the 2nd of April 2020, been implemented, or that's end quote, been implemented in what time frame? Next question. How many submissions on the Bushfire Royal Commission were received at the Customer Service Centre by the 2nd of April? Has there been any progress with negotiations with RMS in improving the Kempsey traffic bridge fencing? And finally, when will the workshop be held for councillors to consider a declaration of climate emergency by Kempsey Shire Council?
Thank you, councillors. We'll now move into confidential. Do I have a thank you, Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Saul. We now need to move into confidential, and